like to call order the June 27th special board meeting. Need a motion for suspension of rules so we can do this thing telephonically. Mr. Denise makes the motion, seconded by Mr. Perkins. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Kelly, go to the roll call.
Reagan,
Here.
Forsythe,
Here.
Lightfoot.
Here.
Sheridan.
Here.
Smithers.
Here.
Denisha.
Here.
Perkins.
Here.
Akers.
Here.
Bay.
Here.
Haggard. Here. Diaco. Here. Burke.
Here.
Northwest.
Here.
Criminelli. Here. Kern. Here.
Quorum. Next, we need a motion to approve the agenda. Mr. Perkins makes a motion. Ms. Kern makes a second. Are there any discussion? No discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Presentation resolution, Mr. Lightfoot.
Mr. Chairman, I offer resolution supporting Assembly Bill A 7919 and Senate Bill S 3908. An act to amend the state finance law, the general municipal law, the public authority law, and the highway law in relation to enacting the New York State Buy American Salt Act, and I move for its adoption.
Seconded by Mr. Forsythe and Mr. Reagan. Any discussion? Mr. Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last week, I want to thank you and Mr. Lightfoot for bringing this forward. And I particularly want to thank you for moving this so quickly and making this into a special board meeting. I think it's imperative that we get the message to Albany, we get the message to the governor that this is a piece of legislation that would cost 80% of the Port of Ogdensburg's major business. It would cost the jobs of many of our longshoremen's union membership. It would cost a lot of jobs of truckers, heavy equipment operators. It would negatively impact our many towns and villages across the North Country that look to the Port of Ogdensburg as a place to obtain the highway salt that they need to keep our roads safe during the winter months. It will hurt the ability of many businesses to keep their areas safe. And it will, at a time of increased inflation, this will simply add to the cost of taxpayers across upstate New York and businesses across upstate New York. Traditionally, New York State has exempted Canada from Buy American provisions simply because our economies are so intertwined. And, it is this particular idea has been batted around the state legislature in the past. And in the past, it was always blocked because senior heads came into play and realized that it would damage the economy in northern New York and serve no real purpose other than to benefit a small, narrow special interest. So I would thank everyone who has signed on as a co-sponsor, and I would thank the board for helping to push this as quickly as possible. I think that, we need to speak with one voice and stand alongside the members of the Bridge and Port Authority Board and, with those, unions that will be negatively impacted and those businesses that will be damaged. So thank you, and I hope everyone will join us in supporting this resolution.
Mr. Denise. Chairman, I'd like to add this response to this. So, Sparkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I think this is a unique situation where we have legislation that has a great effect on both the collective bargaining unit as well as the company in question. Many times one is better advantaged through legislation. This is a detriment to both sides of the aisle. They're standing shoulder to shoulder together on this issue. So it makes it very being support. So again, I think Mr. Reagan said I urge the
Strikers.
Mr. Chairman, I also urge everyone to support this resolution. If you look at the senators that are supporting this bill or where this originated, they're all from Western New York. It's a false cry of patriotism by Buy American Salt. It's by Western New York salt. That's all it is. An egregious, blatant act, self-serving by these senators here representing that portion of the state, salt buys. We need to be able to buy Canadian salt or the best salt that we can buy for the month, save this county money.
Mr. Manelli.
I'll be reviewing myself.
Pardon?
I'll need to recuse myself.
Okay, all right. Anyone else? Any discussion? Mr. Whitfield.
You know, as I see this, it's just a typical way that, I don't want to say our legislators in Albany, but a lot of legislators in Albany pick up the mantle of some of this stuff without reading the fine point. And the fine points being what that does to the local economy. And I think it was brought out pretty clearly here just a while ago, how everything from truck drivers to the stevedores that unload these boats, full of salt that come in here, and the work that it provides to the economy in St. Lawrence County would take a huge hit over something like this. And when would they take it? In the wintertime, of course, when everything else is shut down. So if they read some of this stuff and do a little research once in a while, we might not see these kinds of accidents, I would call them. That never should have seen the light of day. It never should have been enacted into law. And I hope to God that the governor hasn't seen fit to sign it while we're here debating this issue. Thank you.
Anyone else? No more further discussion? Yes, go ahead, Mr. Smith.
I wish to I don't support this, but I was trying to contact the governor last week. I phoned some way. I found it rather difficult. Some of her numbers are old, haven't been upgraded. I finally ended up finding a number to send a fax, which seemed to work. So if anybody has a better way of contacting the governor, I think it'd be a good thing to let us know how it's easier to do that.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Unanimous. Okay, I don't have any appointments, so is there a motion to adjourn? Mr. Kern, Mr. Perkins, second. And any discussion on that? All in favor of adjourn?
All right.
Opposed? Adjourn.
This time we'll call the Monday, June 27th finance meeting to order. First up is the approval of tonight's agenda, moved by Ms. Curran, seconded by Mr. Smithers. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Approval of the minutes on May 23rd, moved by Mr. Forsyth, seconded by Ms. Curran. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. So first up, we have a comprehensive review of the child protection services, preventive services, and foster care of the children's services. We have Tim Ball, the Executive Vice President of Vermont Vehicle.
Hello.
So outside of Courtney Handy with me today, is one of my consultants.
We should have Mr. Murad also present. Mr. Rudd, you can join the Zoom.
I'll see.
So there were two parts to the work being completed, the agency review and investigation. They were all completed. We wanted to have Murad speak this evening by Zoom. We were scheduled to join us. And then we wanted to have the review by Tom Fielder for the back of it as well. We're just checking to see if he's joined us yet.
Well, he's been contacted, Mr. Ball. Can you serve without him?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, hello, everyone. I appreciate you all having us today. So I'm gonna just kind of set the stage for a second. What we're not gonna talk about right now, and John from Hancock is going to talk about, is the status of that investigative work that is completed based on complaints that have been received by the county. As you recall, the other section of the review was really an operational and compliance assessment of the three departments that we discussed, CPS, preventive, and foster care within the agency. And I am going to speak about that today. Just to give you a quick update on where we stand. So we have drafted a report that has been provided to both Hancock Estabrook and to the Commissioner of Pharmaceutical Services, and that's currently in review. Draft very comprehensive. I think it's like 65 pages long. It's got a lot of great information in there. very detailed about the procedures that we completed and the different observations and recommendations that have come from those procedures. And I expect that that will be going into a final phase fairly soon, once it's through final review. And I don't expect there to be really any changes to that draft. What we really do is share that to make sure that there's any factual issues or anything that as provided in a report, we want to make sure that we're right before we issue final to the town. So I don't anticipate there being many changes from that review. I just wanted to be aware of where we stand in the process. I thought it was really important though, based on timing, for us to be here earlier than that, earlier than the final, to really give you the folks here a good update on kind of a summary of all the procedures that we completed and what we really saw, observations and recommendations. So I'm not going to get into a specific ton of detail today, but I am going to give you some high level information that I think would be good. And then hopefully John will join at some point and he can give an update on the investigation as well. So just to tell you sort of what we did, when we got hired 6 months ago, we were engaged for a 6-month process. That 6-month process included a lot of really interactive work with the agency in itself, including a significant amount of interviews. I think we performed over 50 interviews. We reviewed over 45 different cases in CPS, preventive and foster care. We performed those reviews of those cases using state certified methods of reviewing of cases, both in CPS, preventive and foster care. And we did a lot of walkthrough procedures and sort of gaining an understanding of not only the way that the caseworkers within your agency here in St. Lawrence County do their job, the things that are working well, the things that aren't working so well, some of the limitations that they may have from a resource standpoint or time standpoint, from a training standpoint, and also some of the things that we recommend and that we've seen in best practice around the state. We've done this work with a lot of other agencies throughout the state, both large and small. And so I think the recommendations that we make can be from experience that we've seen in other agencies that are doing things well, or things that we've seen that agencies don't do so well. And we've also had a lot of interaction with New York State Office of Children and Family Services and some of their compliance metrics and some of what they consider as best practice. And so we really did bring a lot to the table when we work with an agency such as yours. The first thing I'd like to really say is that the agency and the county itself were very open to this work. And we were very appreciative of that. They saw our life a lot easier if folks are willing to be interviewed by us, if leadership is engaged in the work that we complete, and we're really able to do our job, which is to really dig in, learn how the agency does its job, learn how these 3 functions really actually work, and be able to work kind of interactively and collaboratively with the organization to find good ways that we can recommend improvement in some of those practices. So the first thing I'll say is the agency was engaged. They really were, and they were part of interviews, had a lot of fantastic conversations. The information was made available to us as we requested it. Data was made available to us as we requested it. Nothing was withheld from us as far as doing this investigation. Or this operational review. And so we were very pleased with that as a process. It also allowed us to do this in 6 months, which is actually a fairly quick timeline to do an operational study of these 3 departments. So I'm very pleased to announce that. I want to start by giving some general overall observations of the department as a whole. And when I say the department, I'm talking specifically about child welfare, which encompasses CPS, preventive and foster care. We saw 2 real main findings that we think that the county needs to look at as soon as possible. The first is, didn't really see a documented conflict of interest policy. There are some conflict of interest policies from OCFS that govern CPS work as an example, but we didn't see anything at the local level. And in a county like St. Lawrence, where you're very geographically widely spread, but a smaller population, conflicts can arise. People have relationships with each other, families can span different towns. You may have some workers in your CPS department that have sisters and brothers and other things that may have had a case that came up within the CPS, foster care, prevention. There are also perceived conflicts as far as people who know each other on Facebook, who interact publicly, or both coach a little league team together. And so within a community like this, we think it's very important for the county to have strong conflict of interest policy within their child welfare division. So we highly recommend that they do that. And in our report, we detail a lot of the significant areas that can be covered by a conflict of interest policy. And we recommend that to the county. Another area that was extremely important was the actual documentation of policies and procedures in themselves. So what we see in CPS practice specifically throughout many counties in New York State is it's a highly regulated part of county government, part of the delivery of services within your community. And therefore, you have to have a fairly robust system of policies and procedures that really govern all of what happens in casework, casework review, and other situations that may occur in some of these extremely hard situations that your caseworkers get put in CPS investigations. What we didn't see in this county is extremely robust policies and procedures. We saw a lot of things that need to be completed in casework, and where we would ask the caseworker where the policy was that would govern what they may make, the decision that they may make in a specific situation. They may not know where that policy is or whether it even exists, and their neighbor did. We also talked to supervisors who knew that a policy exists, and their next door neighbor as a supervisor didn't know that that policy existed. So what we saw is a lack of a centralized location of the policies and procedures that did exist. We also didn't really see a mechanism in which these policies and procedures are regularly evaluated and updated based on changes in technology or case law or new recommendations from OCFS. So we highly recommend that the agency, this Child Welfare Division, really prioritize the evaluation of current policies and procedures and create sort of a metric or a timeliness in which they continually evaluate those and update those. By the way, that recommendation is not one that we've only made for St. Lawrence County. That is an area where many counties in social service practice have fallen behind. It's not always the most fun thing to do. So we'll get into sort of how that recommendation falls in some of the other areas that we'll. I'd like to get into some general observations we made about the CPS group. So I'm going to focus now on the CPS team, so Child Protective Services. The first thing we really wanted to do is take a look at the actual number of positions that are available to perform CPS work in accordance with OCFS rules and regulations, and determine whether St. Lawrence County has enough folks performing CPS work and stay within the ranges of cases, both cases and timeliness of casework that OCFS puts out there. And I'm going to tell you what those are. So OCFS recommends that caseworkers have a caseload of 15 cases or less in due time, open cases, CPS cases. It also recommends that a case is closed within 60 days. So when a case is open, you have 60 days for all the casework that needs to be done and hopefully close that case. So what we do when we look at data is we say, okay, if we want every caseworker to have below 15 cases and we want every case to close within 60 days, let's look at how many cases came into the county over the last year. Let's look at how many people were available to do those cases. And let's see if the math even works, right? Let's see if everyone was perfect to close their case within 60 days, maintain a caseload below 15, which is what OCFS says you should do so you can be efficient and accurate in your casework. Let's see if the math works. Well, in St. Lawrence County, there was certainly a lot of ebb and flow in caseworkers over the last few years. Just not until recently, really did we go above that 15 cases based on the number of available people and then how many cases actually came into the county. So the county has been appropriately staffed right on the level with what will be an amount of caseworkers that potentially complete that number of cases if they were perfect. Okay, if they were perfect. So then you look at that and compare it to the amount of caseworkers that's actually been budgeted by the county. And when you do that, they do fall below that 15 casework line. The amount of budgeted people is actually higher. It allows that casework line to stay that a caseworker would average between 7 and 12 cases throughout the last 3 years. Problem is that the county hasn't actually got the amount of caseworkers with their butts and seats doing the work up to the budgeted amount. We have increased the budget. We've allowed more flexibility in how many folks can be catching cases, but we have never achieved that. So I really want to look at both. I want to look at how many people we actually have in town and then how many were actually budgeted. So that budgeted number in our report is much more detailed. We talk about all the ins and outs of that. But what's important to know is we said, okay, the budgeted amount is above. It should keep the county well above that 15, or well below in the sense that 15 caseload. But we're going to hand out some other recommendations that are going to require some FTEs for the county to be better and to more accurately do casework. And so I do think right now, again, based very briefly on just the budget itself, I think we've got enough budget positions and we're in a good spot right now. And I believe that the county would agree with me in that sense. A couple specific things that came out of CPS. We looked at the onboarding and training team. The county has created a training team. So when a CPS worker first gets hired, they do some state training that they have to go off to. And then in between, they come back to the county and they perform casework. Assigning an official training function means that they don't catch cases right from the start. We allow them to take the state training, and then we create a curriculum within the county that teaches them how to do casework. It introduces them to casework. Because to be honest, taking your first CPS case is scary. It's not enjoyable work sometimes. And so it can scare off some of your people that are excited about the job, and they get in and they catch their first case. It's like, holy moly, this is a lot different than I thought it was going to be. We want to slowly teach them, give them all the tools that they need, give them support, and then slowly introduce them into a caseload. And so we have some recommendations in our report to talk about introducing that training curriculum, introducing that training team, and by the way, formally making the policy and procedure around the training team and how to visualize. And we followed some of the other counties in New York State that we know as well. And so we provided some of that feedback to the county. The other thing is that, again, controlling the caseload of the new caseworker. I just kind of touched on that, but a new caseworker should not necessarily get a full caseload within the first few months of them starting. And they also shouldn't get the caseload of someone who just left. Because oftentimes people are leaving, if they not do a great job in their last couple of weeks on the way out, their cases are a little bit messy, their casework and their progress note may not be updated. We don't want to take a brand new caseworker fresh off the street and then our worst cases. So again, it's controlling that spigot of when cases are received, whether the worker individually is ready, have they gone through a formal training program, and then are they able to catch cases. I touched on the fact that we had a hard time, the county had a hard time fulfilling those positions, those budget positions. And why is that? So we gave some recommendations on how to go after some qualified candidates. We gave some recommendations on interacting with the 4 colleges that are in the area, how to get interns, how to get students involved, how to potentially make future case workers. And we also talked about keeping them when they get it, so that onboarding piece becomes very important. How we ultimately train them. Do we support them on their way in? And do we create someone who wants to continue to do this work after the first few months that they've been in the seat? One other area that we covered, and I'll touch on it briefly, is just the work from home policy. Obviously, COVID has changed quite a bit, and this is a large county. There's a lot of miles from one side to the other, and often caseworkers are out on the road often. We think there's an opportunity to allow them, instead of seeing a case all the way to the west side and happy to come back to the office to finish their day for the last hour, maybe they can spend that last hour at home, which is in between, and get an extra hour of work. And we actually did a study analysis how much time could potentially be wasted by just being on the road and not allowing caseworkers to do that casework. We've introduced that concept to the county and gave a recommendation trial that. We also saw a little bit of a shortcoming in the number of mobile devices that are available to caseworkers to utilize when they're out in the field to take pictures and other things that may be very helpful to casework. These mobile devices should be like a county mobile device. And then we were told in interviews that there wasn't enough of them, or they weren't high enough quality that they could use them in their casework. Again, you can take pictures when you're out to basically document the safety of a home, or even document an injury or bruise that may be on a child. And so we highly recommend the county evaluate this, potentially update their mobile communications policy, and determine whether additional resources are needed for the casework. Another area that we see that has fallen off around the state in the last few years and starting to regain traction is better interaction with the schools. Actually putting caseworkers out in the schools and having them as an available resource to each of your school districts or each of your schools. It doesn't have to be full-time, but it's often a different way that some of your mandated reporters can interact, ask questions about potential things that they may have seen with the children. It gives a little bit more connectivity to the teachers, to the students, and to the families that are associated with schools. So we highly recommend we put that in our recommendations to upgrade that school district policy. And again, that's where we talk about some of those potential open positions that might actually expand the caseworker count over that 15 caseload. These are some areas where I highly recommend those positions are actually deployed. And it may not make an immediate difference in what you consider casework, but it's helpful to the community and the safety of the children in the community. So I highly recommend taking a look at some of those positions. The other thing I just want to touch on is we did a lot of casework. So we actually selected cases that randomly reviewed them. And some of those cases were ones that had just been recently closed, some were recently due, and some were in the midst of casework. We evaluated that from many different areas. A couple areas that the county was extremely strong and improved greatly compared to some of the recent OCFS reports was in assessment of child safety, which I think is one of the most important things of CPS work. So the 7-day assessment, which requires the county to document the safety of the child and kind of the future of the case within the first 7 days. The county did a fantastic job with that, including actually scoring 100% on the 15 cases that we reviewed in compliance with that metric. There's another safety assessment that requires the county or a caseworker to actually initiate contact with the child within the first 48 hours, sorry. And that's also 100%. So the county focused heavily on 2 of the most important aspects of child safety, and of the 15 cases we reviewed, they scored 100% of those areas. Where the county struggled was in actual documentation and time limits of documentation. So if we evaluated a case and case activity happened, such as visited the home, interviewed a family member, interviewed the child themselves. When we look at what's called progress notes within the file, they weren't always contemporaneously entered with the timing of the actual event. So OCFS heavily recommends that it's within 30 days of the event. So if you talk to someone within the case, you document that they had that discussion within 30 days. We saw a significant struggle in the timeliness of those progress notes. And I think that's not good. They should be more contemporaneous, and it's hard to assume that notes are perfectly accurate when there are 60 to 90 days after the event occurred. And I think that's pretty easy to understand. The other area for improvement is, again, the documentation supervision. So supervision through interviews, we recognize was happening throughout a lot of the cases. We think probably fairly adequately, but a lot of it was not formalized. So it was often tough when we reviewed the case. We actually looked at the case notes to determine that supervision or meeting regarding that case had actually occurred. And I think everyone in this room understands that if it's not documented, it's really hard to support that it happened, right? And so we definitely know that the county has to work a little bit harder on that. So that wraps up some of the CPS. And again, I just covered the high levels. Just wanted you to understand a flavor of what we were looking at. I'm going to go into preventive, and then we'll move into foster care, and I hope we can cruise along pretty quick. So in preventive, we saw similar activity from a documentation standpoint. So in preventive, the case planner supervisor required to fill out a FAST. And we didn't see that happening nearly as often as timely as it should have. It was often more than 30 days that FAST was actually being filled out. We saw a couple great things in that area. We saw that in preventive, there was definitely always adequate attempt to family contact, which is a crucial part of preventive casework. We also saw that the caseworkers were often receiving monthly updates from the contracted service provider, which is really crucial. And we also saw that in any cases where potential safety concerns were identified, either in the home or a visit with any of the family, that they were talked about and support was provided to them. And we saw 100% in that area. So just a really good job. A lot of the issues in preventive, again, related around the actual timeliness of documentation and accuracy of documentation. We also saw that, again, frequency of home visits by the case planner, that they did a fairly good job, but we did have one case that we looked at where home visits didn't happen within the first 48 days of the case, which is not necessarily a very good thing in preventive case work. Again, the biggest thing I want to focus on preventive, we saw a lot of great casework. We talked to a lot of really good folks. What we really saw is, again, just the timeliness of the progress that's being entered into the system to support the work that had been done. I'm going to turn it over to Courtney, who's my foster care expert. She's going to go through a couple of the foster care areas, and then I think we'll have a brief time to answer any questions. No, I'm not concerned.
Okay. Yep, so just to reiterate, so foster care, we looked at 15 cases. And unlike investigation or preventive, the state does not provide a ton of oversight in these areas. They do run a little, not a ton. So we did focus on that. We also focused a lot on Title IV determination, which I can get into in a second, and then overall operational efficiencies of the department. So in the cases that we reviewed, we looked at the frequency of face-to-face visits with children, frequency of provided through review, and we noted that it was all within satisfactory compliance. So that was great. Title IV requirements, probably are not familiar with Title 40. It is a federal program that provides eligible cases reimbursement from the federal government. So it can be up to 75% of the cost of foster care. And so every county essentially has a department that determines eligibility. And so obviously, because foster care is such a tremendous expense, so increasing the procedures around the determination, the documentation around it, it's really important. So we looked at those determinations, we agreed with them, the coding. We also looked at if there was particular approval, the child received an above normal board rate. That was 100%. So there were some really great things happening in foster care. So kind of go into the observations recommendations. hit the high point. So the first thing, which is most crucial to, you know, quality, care of children, is the documentation of child placement. So we tested these cases. It wasn't consistent in terms of, how these children were, getting placed in a particular home. Who was in the meeting, when did it take place, again, Tim spoke about the conflict of interest policy. So having a formal documented process, for any time a child is going to be removed from a home is crucial. So again, in this meeting, we want to have, you know, there's foster care worker, foster care, the CPS worker, the meeting findings, we want to document who was there, when it took place, and then who was considered, a resource. Are there any relatives, people, others in this child's life that are, you know, willing to be a place of resource? Did we explore all of them? If grandma and maternal aunt all both want, you know, the child, how did we pick one over the other? We want to make sure this is documented. About in other counties, they actually document this and they provide support, and then just, you know, to show that John, you know, they, you know, vetted all of these potential resources. Again, and then to make it even, you know, more comprehensive, having the home actually, you know, making sure that it meets the local standards, you know, just the basic things they do before they pick the child, making sure that there's a smoke detector that's working. Are there safety concerns? How can this person ensure that the child is safe? We want this all documented on this form. So that is probably the number one, you know, recommendation we had regarding foster care. The second one was to provide visitation. So children come into care, and we looked at a bunch of historical data. So on average, about 135 kids are in care receiving weekly supervised visits, and they last between an hour and a half and 2 hours. So visits are obviously super crucial. So having consistent, constructive visitations with a parent, you know, increases the likelihood that they will be reunified, and then decreases time that they're spent in foster care. So the county does cite the resource to provide these visits. There's a lot of resources in terms of planning visits, actually supervising them, transportation. There's a lot involved. So we looked again at the data, and we looked at the people providing these supervised visitations. And we recommended that the county hire one more FTE and potentially work a varied work schedule. People that they do have right now for supervising visits are typically like Monday through Friday, like 9 to 4:30. So having some of the evening hours on weekends where other people could, you know, parents potentially work that schedule would be beneficial. Another one is consistency in the department personnel fostering children. So OCS does not prohibit department personnel from fostering children. Some counties do it, some counties do not. It's up to the discretion of the county. However, there's no disparity in board rate in terms of if somebody is actually certified foster parent in the county or through an external agency. We want to make sure that it is consistent. Again, go back to the documented policy and procedures. There isn't. So we want to have continued oversight in this area. Another one is, again, this really just goes into efficiency, so child movement, defense and foster home certification tracking. So some counties use databases that are developed internally to track child movements. Now, basically, tracking child movements is crucial. You know where the kid is, but movement also, you know, where they are. You have to deal with vendors to appropriately reimburse the expenses associated with fostering a child. Children go to respite, they get free for adoption. There's a bunch of activities that potentially affect reimbursement costs, a multitude of different things. And so right now it's very decentralized. We're a manual. We have caseworkers tracking it. We have home finders tracking it. You have foster care tracking it. So it's a lot of paper and a lot of back and forth. So again, having maybe a centralized database to kind of store this would be, you know, increase the time that we'll spend on this. That would be really helpful. And then the last thing is the cost effectiveness of service providers. So again, the cost of foster care is tremendous. In its own, increase. And so there are service providers in the county provide different levels of services. And a recommendation really here is to analyze its cost on a consistent basis. Make sure they're aligned with the objectives overall of the county, essentially analyzing rates of discharge and again, consistently just analyzing it and seeing the align resources differently to the objective of the county going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Bernie. So again, I hope we can sort of demonstrate a little bit of sort of the kind of how deep we got in the weeds on a lot of different things, and how many folks that we talked to. Again, I want to reiterate, we talked to a lot of really fantastic folks, and this process was very open and transparent. We very much appreciate that. It makes our job a lot easier. We saw a lot of really good things happening, and I know that a report like this sort of highlights the things that we're recommending. But we saw a lot of really good casework, and in a lot of the detailed casework review that we did, we saw a lot of great things too. But we of course have to highlight on the things that we see the need for improvement. So again, our report is currently in draft. It is very, very detailed. You have, if you're feeling tired at night, you want to read something, you can go next to your bedside, help you fall asleep. But it is a lot of information in there. And we very much enjoyed working with the county and ultimately getting all this information and drafting this report. So again, I stayed pretty high level. I know timing is key here, but I suppose we can, if John is ready, John
is with us. Mr. Mura,
I am here.
John, you wanted to speak, then we'll take questions.
I'm sorry, I'm waiting for questions.
So you can go ahead,
I can
and
go
then
ahead.
we'll take questions on both Bonadio and questions if you have. Questions for you.
Okay. Well, what's happened from our firm's point of view at this time is that we've been assisting with the Bonadio Group in investigating the complaints that have been made to the county. Our involvement has has been to review all of the complaints and the relevant DSS files. We sent 20 letters to complainants inviting interviews as part of the investigation. I asked them in each of the letters to let me know if they had counsel, and I would coordinate and speak directly to their attorneys. We sent a total so far of 20 letters. 7 of the complainants indicated that they were represented by Michael Phillips. On each occasion, 5 occasions, I sent letters to Mr. Phillips asking him if he, in fact, represented these individuals and to let me know whether that was the case so that we could schedule an interview with him, or if he didn't represent them, then we would proceed without him. I received no response to any of those letters. 8 of the individuals did not respond. 4 so far have been interviewed by Renee James from my office and Josh Bills from Bonadio, and one interview is being scheduled right now. Most recently, and I'm not sure if this letter's in front of you or if you've seen it, Mr. Phillips sent a very lengthy letter on June 14th advising that he represented 35 complainants. His demands in that letter included that the county turn over its files, its notes, investigations of the various DSS employees that were involved in dealing with the complainants, as well as demanding that Courtney Fantone from the child group be a part of those interviews. I responded on June 17. That letter, by the way, was dated June 4. We received it on June 14. On June 17, I responded and gave him the history of the letters that he didn't respond to and offered to meet with he and his clients mutually convenient date and time for the Bonadio group, Josh and I. So at this point, we're awaiting a response from Mr. Phillips. But our recommendation would be to continue with the investigations without the interviews unless we hear back from Mr. Phillips, so that we can put an end to this process sooner than later. I will say that the interviews, Renee's handled the interviews and couldn't be with us tonight, but she said that the interviews of the people so far have been very pleasant. They deal with concerns that date back many years. So Renee and Josh explained to them that even if there were violations of policy or procedure, the county would be able to go back due to legal limitations. In addition, most of them have been resolved by family court. Therefore, the focus on charges going forward, all complainants indicated what they wanted to see was change in policy or procedures and see that it doesn't happen again, what happened to them. For example, several concerns involve perceived conflicts of interest, which have been addressed by the Bonadio Group in the presentation that you just had. And the proposed worksheet that they mentioned would help document individuals with parent problems. And there's a number of individual complaints, but I think that by and large, they dealt with issues that are, we hope will be resolved by the recommendations that are made by the Bonadio Group. So that's where we are on the investigation at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Murad. Well done. Questions, Mr. Reagan?
For the Bonadio Group, I was wondering if you could let us know what counties that your group has worked with over the years.
Yeah, I don't think I have trouble with that. So would you just like to know history or current counties?
History.
Okay. In different, DSS is a very large unit, so we've done work in child welfare, we've done work in Medicaid and TAT and food stamps and all sorts of different areas. If I was to go across west to east, Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, Erie County, Genesee County, Monroe, Steuben County, Ontario County, Gates County, Onondaga County, Oswego County, Albany County, Schenectady County, Orange County, Putnam County, Sullivan County, be my guess.
So when the State Department of Social Services has issues come up involving county governments who want to bring in a outside neutral observer to see what their operation, to review their operations and give them some unbiased recommendations. Your organization seems to have been one of their the outfits that they go to a lot.
So all of the work that we conducted up until the last 2 years was simply by our just work with agencies, going to the public welfare conference, and different assistance that we provided. We performed a monitoring engagement with the County of Monroe just recently in the last 2 to 3 years. And through that, where we sort of worked and gained more of a relationship with OCFS, with the regional office as part of that review. And we just, I believe, established ourselves as a qualified vendor. And I believe that if the county approaches OCFS and says we have this issue, I think our name is put in the mix now. That's my understanding. I don't think OCFS does not recommend, nor can they recommend, but I do think we're qualified to perform that work. And I don't think there's a lot of other firms or consulting organizations that do perform the work that we do specifically with DSSs. So does that answer your question?
I'm just saying there's a lot of counties that have worked with you on this these kind of reviews.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I think we built up a very strong consulting, framework and program. And I think there's a lot of counties that are very comfortable with the work that we've conducted.
And it also gives you a lot of comparative experience when you're reviewing these.
Absolutely, yes. Yep, we bring that to everyone, including just the concept of good casework and appropriate documentation and staff support and so on and so forth.
And the best practices.
Yes, best as we can. Yep, every county is a little bit different, very specific and individualized, but absolutely as much as we can bring about best case practice we do. Yep.
Mr. Smithers.
In regards to the recommendations on foster care. Last comment was something that I didn't quite grasp of, it was analyzing the cost. Could you just repeat that or explain that a little?
Yeah. So, foster care in itself is extremely expensive for the county. There's a significant local component to having children in foster care. And so we recommend that the county continue to analyze those costs on a year-over-year basis and look at any service providers that you may be utilizing for placement or putting them into facilities or whatever it may be to ensure that you understand that cost. And then you can continue to support appropriate placements with the county based on the amount of children that are in care that need to be placed on and so on and so forth.
Part of this analyzing the cost involves it's called the classification of the placement, something in regards to there's different rates for different needs.
Yes, there are different rates based on the need of the child as they're in place.
Did you find that was appropriately being done? The classification.
I don't believe we saw any issue in that in any of the cases that we evaluated.
Mrs. Hager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for your presentation. I had one quick question about the number of caseworkers. We have added quite a few positions. They're not filled positions. And we do, I don't want to say have a problem, but people leave frequently. Have you guys looked into that at all? And are you going to report out to us some of those issues?
So you're referring to turnover?
Exactly.
Yes. And turnover is absolutely a significant problem both in this county and across the state in casework, specifically in CPS. Work is very difficult. And so we did address some strategies we think that could potentially slow down turnover. And most of it I talked about, which is really in the onboarding and training stage, and also, also some in case management, in a sense of trying to onboard caseworkers effectively to train them and give them the tools they need before they take on an actual caseload, and support them when they do. And then to try to keep their caseload manageable, so that they don't find themselves in a situation where they have too many cases and too many things going on, and it would encourage them to leave the position. Those are the two main areas of turnover that we discussed, sort of relevant to what I talked about then in our report.
I also just very quickly.
Yes.
Thank you. I believe that the centralization of policies and procedures can actually help with it. Because people are then, they don't want to play a game where you don't know the rules, and if you can't, you don't know that you're doing something wrong, that was a great suggestion. I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much for the work you did.
Appreciate that. Mr. Burke.
Should have known you were, if I heard you correctly, us getting fully staffed, child protective. We had our 30th meeting last month, and the average that was reported up to us was 24 cases per group. reconcile that with being fully staffed? I have one question.
So our review, the data that we reviewed was in February of 2022. But it wasn't as of recently. So I can't speak to the numbers you may have just heard in this past month or two. The commissioner may be able to, but
Numbers have been pretty consistent. Months, months. And actually, it was anything from the average case level down. But it hasn't, it's never been down where we can say we've got 15 or less case workers. And I think we use the average 7.
yeah, John, I understand now why we're at a difference. So you are talking about actual cases that are held by the caseworkers right now. What our analysis did was looked at just the data. So it didn't actually look at what the caseload was the caseworkers held. Instead, it said, if you have this many caseworkers and this many cases came in during the year, and a caseworker closed each of the cases that they received within 60 days, which is the OCFS regulation. In this analysis, we also accounted for if someone left, the next person that was hired, we took them out of rotation for 3 months. We also took 2 FTEs off of every month to account for vacations and sick time and other things. And we said, if the number of caseworkers that you had in the seats were to get cases, all the cases that came in for the year, and they were to close each one within 60 days, here's what their caseload would have been.
Praying on the contingency that we were able to close cases that we would be fully staffed. Saw a couple of ifs in there. That's the devil with the details, but I think it's certainly something to strive for. And if I could ask you one more question, foster care, actually maybe 2. I think it was a reference to reimbursement. How much are we reimbursed for foster care? And I think probably I'm saying it's a huge cost for the country. So I guess I'm just wondering, what's the breakdown of what we pay tax as taxpayers, same time versus what the state may chip in.
So I don't have the numbers in front of me as far as what you paid like in the last 12 months, how much was paid in local, how much was supported by the state, or how much was supported by the federal government through the 4E program. I'm sure that the county finance group can get to those numbers. But what I will tell you is you don't have necessarily as a county, what you don't have control of is the metrics that would qualify a child for 4E reimbursement. There are, I think, 8 metrics that qualify a child for 4E. What you can control as a county is ensuring that those metrics are evaluated for every single placement, and that you have an eligibility program or division or folks in your county that understand those rules and regs and evaluate that for every child that comes into care to make sure that if this county is qualified for 4E reimbursement, you get it. And so what Courtney did in her analysis was evaluating if the county was able to complete those tasks timely and efficiently. And the county was very good at determining eligibility for children as they come into the foster care program. Meaning that if the county was eligible for any kind of reimbursement for their stay, they were receiving it. Now, the other thing that Courtney touched on in foster care that I think is really important is there's a lot of other things that relate to casework, such as, again, being able to visit the parents as regularly as possible, these supervised visits, because the encouragement needs to be reunification of the family and removing the child from foster care if at all possible. And that also saves the county money if the child is in foster care for less time. And so there are other ways that the county can look at providing adequate services to the child that's in foster care, and also encouraging reunification if possible.
Second part of the question is the number of children in care. We've gone in and Western State has gone down. And in your review of cases,
We did not review any type of assessment as to why children are coming to care, nor did I compare the number of children in care to any other county. What I've noticed through my 10+ years of working with DSS agencies is there are a lot of things that happen locally and geographically that impact whether children more or less come into care. And so we did not really review that. Our case was if a child was to be coming to care, let's make sure all the policies and procedures around them be put in care, where they're actually placed, and ultimately all the administrative work behind the scenes to ensure that the county can capture as much federal benefit as possible is what we focus on.
Question, clarification for John. I didn't catch the last part. Said you sent out 20 letters. You sent out 20 letters. 7 said they were represented by Michael Phillips. 8 did not respond. I didn't catch the remainder of the 20, and then you mentioned something about 35 complaints. And I didn't catch what you were saying, John, about the 35 as it relates to the 20 investigators. Could you clarify?
Could you hear the question, Mr. Murray?
Not, I very slightly, I wasn't sure if it was addressed to me. If you could have it repeated, I'd answer it.
So Mr. Burke was looking at the numbers of the 20 letters that you sent out. Could you rehash the numbers again?
Yes, I had 7 were 7 of the complainants advised that they were represented by Mr. Phillips. So we ceased communications with them and tried to deal with him. 8 of them did not respond. 4 of them have been interviewed, and 1 interview is going to be scheduled shortly.
And then he wants to know about the 35 represented or complaints that are represented according to Mr. Phillips.
Well, he hasn't identified them. There's obviously some overlap here between the no responses and some people who said they, between the no responses, he just simply gave us their names. And so we're going to make sure we, with Josh, have reviewed all of them, including the ones that did not respond.
Does that answer your questions, Mr. Burke? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Murray. Mr. Arquette.
This is a problem that involves children, and you can't fix it fast enough. At the conclusion of your investigation, if we were to incorporate your best practices and your advice, policies into that, do you have any sense of how much time you experience positives or possibly how much time before we would realize that some of the advice or the best practices may not work?
To be very honest, it's going to rely heavily on the agency and its ability to take our recommendations and bring them to fruition. I've had some very positive discussions with your new commissioner about those recommendations, and in fact, I believe that he and his team are already making some headway on a lot of those. As part of this process, obviously, when we identified the recommendation, we didn't just wait until it was formalized in the report to start talking about it with the agency and workshopping about its effectiveness. And so I believe that the agency is well aware of many of the findings that we had, and is probably currently working on them. Certainly your commissioner can speak more to that. And I would recommend you do ask him for kind of process and what his thoughts are on that.
Thanks. That's very good response.
Mr. Burke.
Just one, it's nice to hear the remarks of our staff. And I think we really appreciate your effort and certainly appreciate the recommendations of how we met all of them. It's nice to get those.
Mr. Smithers.
Yes, I also was glad to hear that you reported that our staff was willing to engage and share information. And question that I have is for Mr. Mueller. And you made a very brief comment about family court. In the 2 years that I've been a legislator, we've been presented with a lot of frustrations. My impression is that we're getting these frustrations, and a lot of them seem to, a significant part of that is involved with the family court and the availability of the attorneys there and the timeliness that cases are being handled there. Do you have any further comment about our relationship with the family court and the acceptability of how things are going there? Because you've mentioned that only briefly.
Yes, it's my understanding that a number of these fair hearings are continuing and actually have been decided successfully for the county. Many of the complaints involve the processes and the representation of their own counsel, sort of a frustration of the complainants as to the entire family court process, which it seems to me is distinct from any particular failing of the department.
It's your questions, just noticed. Anyone else? Mr. Dinesh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Wall, quite obviously, your group has conducted numerous studies with county organizations across the state. And now it's presented us with the findings. It's incumbent upon North County now to identify the goals we want to pursue, timelines, action plans, and reporting. But my question is, do you, the second part question, do you follow up the recommendations that you make?
It's a great question. Personally, I'm very connected with the Public Welfare Association in New York State, and I see a lot of my commissioners that I've worked with over the past years very often, a few times a year at different conferences. And more than that, I've often become friends and colleagues with them over the years as they work to improve their agencies. Developed some very good relationships with the commissioners I've worked with over the years. I look forward to doing that actually with your new commissioner, and I've had some really good first time through conversations with him about the agency and some of the improvements he wants to make. If the county was interested in what I would consider sort of a monitoring exercise or a follow-up, we're certainly open to that concept. And we can take a look at what a project like that may look like, and to the extent at which how much you would like to do that. But to be quite honest, I tend to personally follow up and see how things are going, and help in other ways that we can, and make connections with other counties that might be experiencing similar or have experienced similar issues and might need help.
Yes.
The second part, and obviously you could make some recommendations. What is your success rate regarding implementation with this recommendation?
Again, it's a very tough question because my job is to give the county recommendations based on our observations, and the county's job is to take those recommendations and do whatever they want with them. And so I have some counties that have been extremely successful in utilizing our recommendations, and others to improve case compliance, caseworker output, even staff that stay after being on board and trained. There are other counties who have taken our recommendations, and because of changeover in administration, changeover in legislatures, have completely failed in taking those recommendations and getting their agencies to the next level. I think we try our best to make reasonable recommendations. I didn't tell you to hire 50 more caseworkers. And I think that they can be effective, but it is going to be the county's responsibility to take those recommendations and actually do something with them.
Yep. Mr. Sheridan.
We're trying to gauge how we're doing here in terms of your investigation. So I'm going to ask some questions, maybe a little strong. But did you find anything in all of the areas that you were looking into investigating that would be described as alarming or extreme concern?
So the question's gonna have to be answered in two parts. I'm gonna answer the first based on what that we did in this operational assessment. And I'll let John speak to any of the work that was considered in the investigation, which is of the complaints. Within our work of the operation review, we have a very specific thing that we do as part of case review or any interviews that we do. It's called an elevation policy. So if we talk with the caseworker, or we review a case where we see a significant safety concern or concern of the case that has not been addressed, we elevate that immediately to which was the acting commissioner at the time, in the sense was Heather, and now within your acting commission. During the evaluation of the operational assessment of your county over the last 6 months, we did not have any cases that we did that. We did not have any cases where we had to perform an elevation. So that's good. That's a good sign. That means that we didn't get our hands on a case and go, whoa, what is the county or what is the caseworker doing in this case? As far as practice in procedural, it is very alarming that policy and procedures weren't present in a lot of the activities that were being performed or weren't known where they were or weren't known to be present and had not been updated. And I would say, very frankly, that needs to be addressed immediately, and I believe it is. I'll let John speak to whether you've seen anything in the investigative side or whether he can speak to that at all.
No, so far we have not. And as I've indicated, the interviews actually, from what I'm being told, have been positive. So no, I haven't seen anything that's of that level of concern at this time.
Thank you. Answer my question.
Mr. Lightfoot.
Let's follow up with what Chairman Sheridan asked about. In your report, and I'm not trying to rebut you or anything, but I'm looking for an explanation. It says, we would consider the casework gap in 2 cases grossly non-compliant, as they both had gaps in casework of approximately 4 months.
Yes, Mr. Lee, thank you for the question. So again, there are 2 things going on here. We talked about the lack of documentation. We talked about the timeliness of documentation. So we do consider in instances where there's a gap in casework, that it could be related to documentation gap, not necessarily casework practice. It's not documented though, it's very tough to determine whether the activity happened or not. So I hope that helps in the first part.
And I would just follow up with in that line, as you're talking about documentation of the case by the caseworker in the report and in the notes.
Yeah, in the progress notes is what I'm referring to as far as.
And in addition to that, a discussion, a timely discussion with a supervisor, at least on a monthly basis.
So we did talk, yes, so we did talk about timely discussion with supervisors, but again, we're referring to what is documented. So in interviews, we heard that discussions like that were happening, and we had been informal, impromptu, different discussion of cases, but we did not see it documented. So we do consider the lack of documentation fairly egregious in that sense of determining whether appropriate case activity occurred. I'm trying to recall without my memory that comment in which area that it was in. Areas that prevented.
Actually, it's in CPS. That is in preventable. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
In CPS, if we had seen that type of gap, that the caseworker did not have eyes on a child who was under a CPS investigation, we would have had a very significant problem. Had we evaluated that case and seen that there was nothing showing that that child had been seen in the amount of time that had been seen, we would have elevated that case. Preventive is a significantly different case practice in that sense, and not necessarily, it's not great case practice, but not really as important in the safety perspective in the way that we value this.
Okay, so if I may, in CPS, in the prevent side, you took 15 cases, it says. And it says out of those 15 cases, that you found 2 that were non-compliant. Is that a rather high, I don't want to say percentage, but a high number, given the low number of cases looked at of non-compliance? And did your findings indicate that you were looking at substandard or at least questionable non-compliance with an individual or with individuals?
So I believe the way, if you're looking at a case, the way our casework evaluation looked is we measured multiple, facets of the case, different types of criteria. So I'm not sure without looking which areas specifically you're talking about, and which two cases did not, fail that metric. I do believe, Mr. Langford, that our report is very clear on those, whatever those findings are, and what our interpretation of those are, and what we think the way that the county needs to evaluate those findings.
Okay, so if I may continue.
Yeah, if you're referencing, you've seen the report, I don't think the rest of us have.
Well, I've seen the report because I'm the chairman of the services committee, and I sit in on the department's weekly meeting. So that's why I got a copy of the report. So I do have that benefit, but I'm going to take advantage of that benefit tonight, being these folks are here in person, and obviously more than welcome to answer questions. So if I may continue, I will be brief as I can. You mentioned the 24-hour and the 7-day safety assessments as being among probably the most important things that a caseworker does with the case, upon receipt. But St. Lawrence County had a terrible percentage of cases that were not done in time and on time. And what you said was that transparency, prioritization, and dedication are reasons touted for this change. Those are pretty general statements, and what I'd be looking for, was there a singular event or a singular thing on the part of someone that caused this turnaround so that now we're at the top of the pile? It seems like any of those three, or even three of them as a group, wouldn't have been the cause of such a turn. And what I'm looking for is what turned this around.
So I don't know the answer to that, Mr. Lightfoot, because it was prior to us beginning this work. I know that we looked at the historical data of the success of St. Lawrence County in those two metrics, and we saw significant improvement between the historical data and then the cases that we evaluated. And so that what we stated is that we saw significant improvement. And when we discussed this in interviews and asked about the specific area, the agency told us that they had prioritized these two specific areas to make sure that they were within the guidelines of OCFS related to 48-hour and 7 or 24.
And one last question. I was quite impressed with the way that you looked at calculating cases in three different ways. By a budgeted figure, how many of the budgeted positions there were, how many of the budgeted positions filled, and actually filled, and
We also did the average across the period of time. Yep.
right, using the average, correct. In each of those scenarios, I'm seeing caseloads that are either very close to what the recommendations for them are by OCFS. And in most cases, I'm seeing significantly less cases. In fact, in three of those scenarios, two of them do not exceed 50. One of them does in the past year, it has spiked. I don't quite understand, and maybe it's a question you can answer, but we are consistently told that our numbers are above not only 15, but 25. Is there an explanation for that?
There is. So what this data represents, Mr. Lightfoot, is if every case was closed in exactly 60 days, as OCFS is the regulation recommends. And that every caseworker got up and running within the first 3 months of them arriving, was able to take on a full caseload. And it also, it really just, in a sense, Mr. Lightfoot, it's how we develop the baseline of, in a perfect world, do you have enough folks in these positions to perform the casework? There are a lot of things that, and I believe John touched on this as well. There are a lot of things that would make it so that the county was not achieving at this level. The first would be that cases weren't being closed on time, that they were lagging past 60 days, which is very realistic, which is why we also included a 90-day assessment in our work. Another area is, again, efficient casework practice. Let's keep in mind that one of the biggest things I hammered home when I talked about recommendations is getting caseworkers to be more contemporaneous with their notes. That is going to take a change in discipline within the organization, and probably more time to be more efficient and timeliness with their notes and accurate. Supervisors, when they conduct meetings related to cases, they're going to have to make sure that they spend the time to document those meetings occurred in each of those individual cases. These things are going to take more time. If the agency is going to put more resources toward better training and onboarding to try to slow down that turnover problem that you currently have, that is going to take more time and more another position or two from the organization. So again, we were trying to show you with some numbers, with some actual OCFS, numbers of really where the agency could be with good casework that we should there within 60 days. I would highly recommend that we kind of continue to monitor its effectiveness going forward without us, but using the same data to see where that continues to fall within the 15 case limit and within the 60-day timeline. I want to add one more item, is that we counted each case as a one. We said each case was worth one case, kind of thinking that each case, the complexity level is the same. That is not the case. In fact, a lot of times when the state performs this type of work, they do a lot more, they do some more detailed data if we didn't have time for in this operational review. But some cases may be considered worth 2 cases because they're complex and they take so much time. And we did not account for any of that in this analysis either. This is a very simple analysis just to try to give you an idea of where you really are in budgeted and actual positions compared to casework across an average.
I thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate the responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lightfoot. Mr. Forsythe.
Thank you. I appreciate everything you presented so far. The documentation procedures, in my life, documentation, notes on file or actual electronic?
It's a good question because what we're looking at is progress notes that are on file, that are electronic. When we talk about a caseworker putting in casework or progress notes 30 or 60 days later, we did not go back and say, hey, did you have that? Did you have that written down in a binder and you finally uploaded it? Or did that come out of your head? We didn't ask those questions. We didn't follow up to that level of detail. So I'm not speaking again to the documentation that happens at the event, right? I'm talking about what's actually in the file, in the progress notes electronically that we can review when we review the case.
Yeah, because in my world, write it down, have it in the file and sit, and then you have to whatever. At least that's on the program.
And it's possible that some of that existed that we did not look at. We looked at what was electronically in progress.
I just don't know how late that system is. Yeah, okay, thank you.
And I have Margaret and then Mrs. Haggard, and then Mr. Burke.
Thank you. I want to be sure that is right. I asked you about this. You said that your projection on how many cases each caseworker has to do with budgeted positions, right? We don't have the budgeted positions right now.
We did the analysis 3 ways. We did the analysis with the budgeted positions. We did the analysis with the actual people that were there, including like the turnover, 3 months started for anyone new who came in, let me go back. I'll give it to you a little better detail. We quite literally took month by month, how many people were available to perform cases. And that includes if a new person started or if someone terminated, we removed them from the list for that next month. And then if a new person filled their position, we did not allow them to start taking cases in our theoretical data example until 3 months after they started to accommodate for training and onboarding. We also, if, for instance, there were 20, and this is an example, there were 20 caseworkers, 20 FTEs that were available to take a case, we would remove 2 FTEs from every month to accommodate for vacations, sick time, and people that may not have been available to do a case. The third way we did it, this is a kind of a data tool, is we just averaged the number of caseworkers across the entire period. We analyzed it 3 different ways so that the county can see where you fell among that, all caseworkers fell within the 60 days, and where you fell on the 15 caseworker level.
Okay. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. Sure.
Two quick questions, policy and procedure. And, do you have any in your travels and your reviews, are there any entities that you would recommend for us to look at their policy and procedures?
So we actually offered in our report some different things we want the policies and procedures specifically focus on. Many of them will be what we consider local policies and procedures or protocols. Secondly, there are some there's national areas that you can pull caseworker or our public welfare policies and procedures from. We also provided a couple of things in foster care from our travels. Courtney actually created some custom templates for the county to start using and checklists. And also your commissioner in New York State is going to be is probably already part of them, but there's a lot of regional roundtables where we can speak with a lot of other commissioners from regional districts, and there's a lot of statewide meetings as well. And certainly I've already connected your commissioner with 2 counties that I work with that I trust, that he can certainly ask and gain additional information from.
Progress notes, like a drop down type of thing that covers all of the essential components that you need for safety check. I guess what I'm wondering is there are some things that will aid our caseworkers in writing them to ensure that all the good lives.
You're talking about when the child is placed specifically?
I'm not, our documentation, I don't know, wherever we're deficient in our documentation.
So the progress notes is it's not a drop down. It's a handwritten note in each of the progress notes.
Progress notes are entered in connection, which the statewide.
Could it not be a drop down? I'm thinking about, how many ways do you describe safety?
So I love where you're getting at. So there are certain elements of case review and supervision that actually, in a sense, you can have a couple, in a sense, like more go-to notes that can document what it is that you've done and achieved the case. And I believe during some of our interviews, we did have some recommendations for some of those notes and what they may look like. But each case is very individualized, John, and we highly recommend that the case notes are specific to the case activity that happened in each of those individual cases. I would not recommend that we use any kind of canned language. And there's not, as far as I know, there's not a drop down in connections for ours.
It's been used in mental health for like social history and stuff, so that you fill in the blank, you customize it, but it covers all the basic elements. There.
Yeah, I understand. I think there are certainly places of case where a template like that will be helpful and facilitate more speedy input of progress notes. But again, each one needs to be specific to the case. I know what you're saying.
Yeah, yes.
you may recall that Mr. Chandler, when he was here last week, spoke to, as a part of the performance improvement plan, progress note training for all staff is put into place and become mandatory. So that's from OCFS is provided to all staff. So I think that's one of the tools, to your point, that hopefully will help folks become more fluent in doing that.
Ms. Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you had mentioned previously that there's significant change what is now in historic data. Were you able to tell like what time period that change started? Like this month was bad, next month was good. Do you have a date for that?
Not that I can recall.
That's it?
Well, no, there's
Oh, you had
another.
another.
So can we look back to our own historic data group and someone at that, see when that time period took place?
Are you asking about safety assessments?
Yeah, they, should we, when did we stop falling out? When did they begin? What was the time period?
Well, I can speak to that in terms of the add that we number in 2021. In children's services, we added director of services. And so we also promoted a supervisor into the grade A and moved. So there was an additional FTE in the supervisory role. We focused at that time very heavily on safety assessment. There was also more people involved with that specific. But I can find out when that number started to change. You bet.
Anyone else? Okay, you mentioned the 60-day closing. What is our average?
We did not calculate, what your average was in this period of time. I would have loved to, but, we did not get that far with that.
So that's just the perfect scenario that all, that's the recommendation from OCFS.
I mean, better than 60 is great, but 60 days is what OCFS recommends as a time period for closure. And so we use that to do our data analysis.
One of the things you said brought home the issue for me, and that's about the documentation in foster, about the child placement, and that our foster care workers are actually supposed to be working to reunite these children with families. And I think that's one place that we have been efficient, at least from people outside my constituents that I hear from. And so I'm glad that you pointed that out. And we certainly will address it.
Yes, and we've even, Courtney has put together from her extensive travels in foster care, she's put together an actual template document that can be used to document the meeting and the decisions that were made with that meeting, including who was present, and who was evaluated as a potential place for the child to be placed. So I think that would be really helpful from the documentation standpoint as well.
So I think, Mrs. Tiger, if this is about case numbers,
That's really clear.
go ahead.
Thank you. Obviously, we use some sort of state system for reporting and everything. Are there software packages that are geared towards DSS services that we could benefit from, and are you familiar with those?
So there are some capable, what I'll call sort of, just because there's sort of some case management tools.
Yes.
And software tools. There is one called Northwoods that we've interacted with in reports. There's another called Diana that I think you're talking to. And they are a software platform that allows you to pull information out of connections, so you can evaluate case histories and other things for a case on your way out to maybe visit a family. You can also use iPads to put notes right in to the case, like right in the car after you're done. You can use the iPad to take pictures of the home and document that. The only issue with those software platforms is that they do not have the right yet, as of the last time I spoke with them, to upload that information back into connections. They have to, what the caseworkers have to do is basically upload it into their desktop, and then they copy and paste it over into the progress notes. But there are certainly software solutions that do make that does make casework a little more efficient in some of those areas. It is very costly to the county though, and it is absolutely an investment in the iPads and other resources that would be necessary to house the software. So it's something that the county would look into.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Mr. Burgess.
Thank you. We talked about the 60 days for the closing of cases. You mentioned the county needs to create training to actually do the work. Did you evaluate the training we are currently doing or have any recommendations on more than the documentation?
Yeah, so we did take a look at the way that the county has historically trained caseworkers. And St. Lawrence has historically relied on the state training that is provided, which is provided every other week over. Yeah, it's like a few months, 3 or 4 months. And I have no comment about the state's training. I've not been through it and I haven't seen. But the county, what we did recognize is that some of the folks that were going through that training were I say catching cases, but they were getting cases either right after they were done with that training or as they were approaching the conclusion of that training. And so what we're highly recommending is that the county creates and implements its own training program that works collaboratively with the state training that's being offered, and utilizes that training to teach everything about the way St. Lawrence does casework, all the things they need to know, where all those policies and procedures are, and then slowly strategically introduces them into casework and receiving cases, and uses even receiving cases as part of their training until they sort of graduate from the county's training and can receive a full caseload. We've seen that effectively deployed in some other counties, albeit larger counties that have some more resources and create actual like training teams. But what we will say is that when training and onboarding is not thoughtfully thought about during that period, receiving a caseload before you're ready can be very alarming, and results in turnover for the person who's been here for 6 months.
Thank you.
So the expectation is, I'm talking with Ruth, the county administrator, that we will have this report for us to read before services. Our expectation is that, Mr. Seaver, you will have a plan in place that you will demonstrate to the board of actions that you're going to be taking. So we'll plan that for services in July. So I'd like to thank the Bonadilla group, Lynn Courtney, for the presentation. We went through a lot of questions. Hopefully we didn't go too hard. We appreciate your efforts on our behalf.
Yes,
Very much.
thank you all for having us. Very much appreciate it.
Okay, so we'll move on to the rest of our meeting, and first up is the resolution of highway, that's Mr. Don Chambers. And that resolution is modifying the 2022 budget of the Department of Highways for McCarthy Road Bridge for the west branch of the St. Regis River, bid number 335837. Moved by Mr. Smither, second by Mr. Kern. Mr. Chambers.
Thank you. This project is underway, and as it states in the resolution, this project will not be eligible for CHIPS funds because it will exceed the amount that is allowable to be done by in-house forces. This structure, in order to make sure that we were able to construct this year, the actual beams, structural beams for this project were purchased in 2021 and were being fabricated over that time. It's a project with funds will be expended over a 2-year period. In this project, well underway and being constructed by the other, the way that we will make up the revenue that is would be offset by not counting this as chips would be from in-house work and in-house equipment that would be charged to other projects. The way to do this project much more efficiently and cheaper, get the biggest bang for our buck. By moving the funds that will allow us to continue moving.
Any questions for Mr. Chambers concerning this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Thank you.
Our next resolution is modifying the 2022 budget for the Department of Highways for revenue received from insurance recovery for Buck Road Bridge. Moved by Mr. Forsyth, seconded by Mr. Smithers. Mr. Chambers.
Yes, unfortunately, in April of this year, there was a motor vehicle accident on the Buck Road Bridge in the town of Waddington. And the bridge railing and the deck were damaged during that motor vehicle. This structure had already been yellow flagged by the state of New York, and the county forces had done some work to extend the service life of this structure. However, this accident has moved it along, and likely we would need to do a replacement in 2023 or 2024 year. The structure replaced temporary concrete barrier, replaced the rail that was damaged. The anchorage units and everything that were in the deck were demolished during this accident. So temporary concrete barrier were placed on the structure to keep the bridge functioning until.
Any questions, Mr. Chambers? Seeing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. We'll move on to solid waste, also starring Mr. Chambers, and the resolution is solid waste credit card use for discussion.
Thank you. As of late, we've had numerous issues with our credit card machines and the transference of data to our software for our sales. In communications with the credit card companies, they are going to be sending us all new units to help take care of any of the current reading issues that might be there. And in August, they are supposed to be rolling out a new chip reader, then they will be replaced. So short-term replacement of the units with just the regular scan units and upgraded chip units, which they are just initiating, getting them underway, to be replaced as soon as they are available.
Questions concerning this topic, Mr. Burns?
Thank you for addressing this. It seems very important. Been a lot of backlog with it. But I guess the question I have, I know that the new one won't have chips for a while, but the credit card machine and your weigh scale machine, they don't really interact, do they? Or do they?
They don't, there's got to be data that is placed in there. And a lot of the issue that is, a lot of the issue that surrounds that is, is that they don't, when they are logged together. And when a magnetic strip does not function or the machine malfunctions, there has to be a lot of additional manual effort to get that in. So it is a problem. So we're trying to eliminate everything that's on the county end that is a problem. The chip reader is going to take care of a lot of that other issues that we're having, hopefully not have as many malfunctions. I know I carry a credit card in my wallet, and the magnetic strip often gets damaged from a personal perspective. So hopefully with the chip reader, a lot of the issues are going to be.
Now, I know that should alleviate most of the problem, but if there happens to be some issue with a credit card or whatnot, when they print out a ticket, and then they have to go back and void it, potentially void it or do whatever, then you end up with, it takes considerable amount of time and you have quite a bit of a backlog of people trying to get through. I was just wondering if there's software, I know it's an enterprise fund, is there some software that would work with the credit card machine to try and make it more seamless effort?
It would probably entail replacing our scale operating our scale operating platform. And when we chose the operating platform for our scales, it was to be in compliance with what the Development Authority of the North Country was doing, because we share data with them, because they do our DEC report, so. You know, so we're serving a couple masters, and so we're trying to use the data that we've got to supply Dang at the DEC, which requires one, and this credit card company does not, and that scale company don't match together. So that's really the underlying issue, and with it being with being a county enterprise, you can't go to a lot of other credit card companies because the county would need to pay the fee for the credit card, whereas in discussions with the county treasurer, we cannot do that. So we have to have a company that charges that to a customer. So it really ties us in, it puts us in some real tight corners of what we can and cannot do. But I believe the chip reader is going to take care of a lot of our issues. But it's not going to be 100%, but it's going to alleviate most of the problem.
Now, the Waymaster scale, do they have updates or anything that may be coming that would work with that?
Work with IT on that, see if we can fix some of those.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to discussion about the recycling center concept at the transfer station in August.
Yes, thank you. In 2021, we had discussions with first with the solid waste committee, and then with this board, we hired a consulting firm to basically design a recycling transfer station after the development authority of the North Country put the county on notice that at the close of 2022, they would no longer be operating the recycling transfer station in Harrison. So that put us on track to have our own transfer station to deal with recycling. By state law, the county is responsible for solid waste within the county. So it is a responsibility of the county to deal with its waste and its recycling, but it's also our choice of how we accommodate the state guidance. And through the study that the Development Authority did for recycling, it was determined that a recycling center was not a viable option, even if all three counties and Fort Drum would go and work together. So the idea of having a regional recycling center was also not a viable option. So the next most viable option is a transfer station for us, because we are so so geographically vast. Recycling and transfer is necessary. So there's only there's regional recycling facilities, and the most cost effective that we found is in Liverpool, New York, which is run by Recycle America or by Waste Management, excuse me. So the concept would be is to take the equipment that the Development Authority has offered, which includes the scale, two trailers that would allow compacted recyclables to go on behind the tractor trailer, and the compactor unit. So at the facility at the Ogdensburg transfer facility, if you could share that down, and I'll hope to be able to explain it. This is one of the drawings. In the center of the drawing, and in the lighter gray, is the current driveway where the residents and the customers come in, and then there's a scale house in the scales that is in that where the hand mark is. That's the scale house and scale, and the traffic comes into that facility and gets weighed, and either goes over to the right-hand side in this diagram to the platform for dropping off recyclables, or toward the bottom left to the transfer station. What is proposed here with this is, in the end, to remove the residents to come in, residents and customers come in at the left-hand driveway that is gray, which is currently where all of our workers and our trucks enter and make that the new area for the customers to come in. And then they would go to the right in the street, and there's a toward the existing scale house. And that's where the development authority scales would go. By arranging the scale, perpendicular to the existing scales, the scales in their current form would be still operational while we replace the new scales. And in addition, would be put onto the scale house to accommodate that scales. So no operations would need to be shut down, simultaneously be constructed and be operational at the same point. And so then after they would go across scales, say it's going for recyclables, the residents would still use the same ramp that's to the right of the street. However, the larger customers, the trucks, transfer trucks would go to the bottom right of the street. If you can scroll it up, please, maybe a little bit. Well, anyway, there's in the dash line just below that is the proposed area, which would be a cover, basically a coverall fabric cover building with concrete walls, where the compactor and the truck would be stationed to get materials compacted in. The other improvement that we would make is where the MSW, the garbage is used. We would use the same facility, but instead of having traffic come up from the scales and go down toward the left to the MSW, the garbage area, we would keep a circular motion of traffic, so when they would not be opposing each other, that they would circle back down, around, and come back onto the scales to get scaled back out. So not only are we looking at putting recycling here and being able to take the large trucks to be able to dump on the floor, which will make the recycling easier for our customers, be it large and small, but also for our own county vehicles that will be transferring dumpsters of recyclables from the other transfer stations to this location to be compacted from, say, a 6-ton roll off of recyclables, is what we get to between 20 and 30 tons for movement to Recycle America and Liverpool, New York. And our proposal would include continue to work with Casella with their already pre-compacted load tractor trailer loads of recyclables, which amounts to around 3 a week. Instead of the material coming here, the trucks our county trucks would go to Casellas in Parisville, connect to their trailer, direct haul their recyclables directly to Liverpool, New York, and then 3 loads a week, tractor trailer loads approximately per week would come out of this facility. So this would require that the county basically put on 2 additional heavy equipment operators, one basically to operate the tip form, and one to basically haul the Liverpool. Basically 6 loads a week that we have. So it's going to be a full-time job, basically hauling the recyclables. We will gain efficiencies by not hauling lighter loads to Harrisville as we currently do, and we will not have the $11 per ton fee that the development authority is currently charging the county for use of their transportation. However, we will have the cost incurred by building this facility, getting additional 2 tractors, all the trailers, and the maintenance associated. This project is nearly completely designed and is ready to go to construction soon if the board wishes to go in that direction.
like I said, this concept we went over last year, went into design, and that's just trying to bring this information for the board. I think you'll find that this will improve our efficiencies. For example, not using Messina right now. The roads go from Messina all the way to Harrisville. With this phase, we'll be taking a lot of the dumpsters from Messina just to Ogdensburg and compacting them in a tractor trailer to make that delivery much more efficient. There's pluses and minuses and deficiencies, but the bottom line is, unfortunately, it's the county's responsibility to deal with this, and the development authority in the North Country will no longer be handling this task for us. And that's where our recyclables, by the way, are currently going from the development authority of North Country to Recycle America in Liverpool. So it really, our destination of our recyclables is not changing. It's just how we're going about doing that. Instead of development authority of the North Country compacting the material, we're going to be compacting it with our own forces here and not using a more efficient way of moving the product instead of in 6-ton loads. We're going to be moving 20 to 30 ton loads.
Questions, Mr. Chambers, Mr. Request.
Obviously, we are entry sets are receptacles, but at the point that this, you get refined and moving along, is there any opportunity to bring any recyclables from the surrounding area to potentially increase profitability for the staff?
Absolutely. There would be the ability for that. The 3,000 tons or so that we would putting through this compacting would be easily expanded. So this would could take additional flow if there were markets, say Franklin County wanted to start sending it out. Certainly they could bring the, it could handle the flow. Yes. Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, I forgot to mention when we were looking at this a year ago, recycling charges were around $150 a ton. And now we're down right around $11 a ton. So in 1 year's time, we've had a lot of other things that have increased. Good news, recycling, the cost of recycling at Recycle America has gone from 150-ish to $10 change.
Smithers. So we're not losing money on recycling anymore.
Our tip fee is $30 a ton, and our current fee for disposal or for processing is $10, something 16 something plus the $11 fee for tank. So yeah, it's still not a money maker, but it's much better.
So would be involved for the counties, how would it become profitable?
We would have to charge them a fee. So it would probably be higher than what we would be charging ourselves. That would be the decision.
Mr. Forsyth.
I got another question for Don after everyone.
I think you're the last one to ask.
Thank you, Don. My questions were asked along the roads and more. The state, my transportation is going from Morristown to Ogdensburg out to Lisbon. So 68, 37, they haven't been mowed, the state highway at all. The deer, I don't know about people everywhere else, but the deer are eating them out. Everywhere you go, is that deer everywhere. And I reached out to you when I went to my town board meeting and you said, at the end of the month. Is there a way, town of Lisbon's done their split. They just did my road the other day. The second time. Is there a way the towns can cooperatively work with the county or the state to help out on this? shoes because it's becoming a concern of liability.
We do an annual contract with some towns.
Okay.
Something that could be, one town, that's, if you're, even though we're approved by the board and we have discussions, instead of not.
Yeah, and I understand the cost, and now it's becoming kind of,
Well,
I'm seeing it here in all these different places, you know, and this sucks. You know?
well, I assure you, we will be seeing more and more. They're out on the road. I've actually used one of the mowers, the county mowers, to more than our, so did get help from another town with shared services so that I couldn't.
Maybe we should speed the state one too, because I don't think they move anywhere, but I've seen. No. I don't know how you do that.
I can mention that to the regional.
I think that'd be a good person, actually. Great,
We're not concerned with
thank you.
that.
The towns aren't electing to do it because they don't have the manpower, or it's not financially rewarding enough, or is it a combination of both?
I think you'll find it was not financially rewarding.
How much are we paying per mile?
I'm
Is
sorry.
that 250? Is that 250 miles?
I would.
Okay, all right. But when you get back to us, figure out your costs. Ms. Turner.
Thank you. Don, the other day I sent you a video that one of my two front, like, kind of and sort of down to where the 131 detour is. So it brings everybody out 131 around in town. And the road types are pretty, long, nobody's been there. Is that a road that we contact the town? How is that road?
It is not. We are going to be doing that within the next week or so. That's honest. And by the way, the highway law, we are well within our, it is actually prescribed the dates of when the mowing will be done, and we're well within our, what is required by law. So just wanted to put that out there as well. It is very well prescribed in the county or state highway law of when we build all the roads.
Second group of that. So when, and I toured the area, because I hear a lot from this. So, and I toured this area, I can see where he's talking about that some of the area has kind of grown up beyond what, normally cut back to. There's small trees and sumac and other things. At what point do we kind of get involved in that to make sure that people have adequate, like, line of sight to be able to see? Because some of it, it would be, like, I'd want to edge a little bit further out, almost for the front of my car, kind of in the lane to my left, just to be able to see well.
Certainly, in some areas, it's required to be done manually by our forces. There's a complaint or something of that nature, we do address that. But we also do have a program where we have a, what's called a Max on a tractor that will mechanically remove brush along the roadway. So that is employed as well, but that's separate than normal. Because a lot of times that's growth, trees that are coming into the road that are maybe overhanging or what have you. And then we also, there's an issue when we do have a 70-foot bucket truck that that's something that we can actually put a county worker in to address, say, an overhanging branch that's 40, 50 feet above the road.
Mr. Burns.
Don, we talked about the shoulders of the roads here previously. I was just wondering if those are being investigated and addressed, especially with the amount of rain we've had lately washing it away. Have you looked at that?
Most certainly have, and we've actually been using a cold mix asphalt in a lot of the areas to replace that with washed out
I know I do have a particular issues in some of the southern areas. County of 27, 17. There's areas that will be an area after we're done our capital projects. Where we're going to be pressing that like regrading the shoulders because there's excess sand built up from the winter operations. So that I've gone over that with my supervisors in the areas, and that is going to be a target. But before we pave any project, we do it on all our paving projects. So we need to get to our paving projects first, and change the culverts, and then we'll do either early in spring or late in fall. We will try to address those areas as time goes. The areas along the roadway, we're utilizing a truck with instead of the conveyor chain that we have for putting the material down on the road. It's a live box truck. We've actually replaced them, two of the trucks with a conveyor belt so that we can put asphalt or the full mix asphalt in those recesses. So less handling by fortunately we actually have a chute that we built from the where we normally be the center for the sand we put down, and that's what we use to put the full mix asphalt right in the location where the washout. Sorry, we are reporting.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Smithers. Don, are we giving any thought at all to making sure our roadways are friendly toward use of people who want to bicycle?
There is a Fleet Streets program, but that is something that we have not funded or added bike lanes or something that folks maybe have just fundamentally safe as possible. And I can tell you, I have been struggling to keep the number of employees that I need to do the work out there. They are employees that are working very hard to keep things going, but I've also struggled to keep the staff level at the needed level. Not that we're not funded in the budget, that's not my point. It's just keeping employees doesn't position fast. It's an extreme struggle. And hopefully with introduce plans to deal with that issue. I'm hoping that in the near future we can have some certified training facility where we can train our own employees on for CDL within the department. So that's something that we'll probably be discussing with the legislature here within weeks.
Yeah. So this recycling center, is there a cost? Has that been determined yet?
Has not been determined yet. We've been given some rough estimates, but as we will know when the bids come, in, certainly. That's
Some start time and completion time?
we're hoping to finish by the end of the year. So that's the timeline because we're going to be done with
And
it.
the,
Development authority of the Brunswick will not be operational.
in ordering the trucks, is there a year or two delay?
There's going to be a problem. Trucks a little long. We should.
You got some spares we can use them for this.
We have trucks that we can use. We've got a sufficient number, but they are also warranty. Need to be replaced. There is a supply issue where right now it takes well over a year to truck from the time of order.
And the cost of this will be by the enterprise fund, it won't be taxpayer funds.
That's correct.
All right, let's move on. Thank you, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We have Pamela Lewis, as Barb Lashaw has retired.
Oh,
Barb?
almost, Kevin.
I told Barb that we did not accept her resignation, and that's why she's here tonight. So, and
This
Pam.
is my last hurrah.
Okay, so the first resolution is authorizing the chair to sign an amendment to the contract with St. Louis County Workforce Development Board to update the new executive director. So this is moved by Mr. Burke, second by Mr. Smithers and Mr. Ledflow. Go ahead, Ms. Lash.
Thank you. This resolution will fill a vacancy created by my expiring contract with Pam Lewis, who currently serves as my assistant. Pam served as an employment and training counselor at the One Stop. She has 30-plus years' experience with current WIOA as well as previous program experience. I think she'll make a great addition.
Any questions for Ms. Lashua concerning this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next resolution is establishing the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act budget for the 2022-2023 year. Moved by Ms. Curran, second by Mr. Perkins. Go ahead, Barbara.
Thank you. This establishes our budget for the program year 2022. The funds are provided by New York State. The total budget for this program year is $1,547,194, which is an increase of $129,280 over last program year.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Lashua? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next resolution is authorizing the chair to sign a memorandum of understanding between St. Lawrence County and St. Lawrence County One Stop System Partners on behalf of all applicable parties. Moved by Ms. Burke, second by Ms. Curran. Ms. Lashua.
Thank you. This resolution allows for us to move forward with the MOU with our partnering agencies as required by New York State DOL upon Mr. Button's approval. Signing after July 1st will allow for the new executive director's name to be on the document and help it to move forward for electronic signatures.
Any questions for Ms. Lashua? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. So now we have a discussion on the 2022 Summer Youth Employment Program update.
Sure. We have fielded about 237 applications to date. You must be income eligible to participate in the program. So we have interviewed approximately 150 youth throughout the county. Tentatively placed, we have about 86 on the county payroll and 17 with the staffing agency for a total of 103 youth. The 17 that are with the staffing agency are all in positions that were deemed a little more dangerous, a little just something that the county didn't want to take on the chance of accepting liability in case there were any comp claims. So that's why we have 17 youth with a staffing agency. They will cover the comp claims. We currently have about 67 work sites, which constitute about 158 work slots. And additionally, I'm sorry, we have 3 work crews that will be followed by job coaches, and we have employed 2 adult youth or adult to circulate between the job sites to oversee the youth as they work to make sure that they're complying with Department of Labor regulations.
Any questions or comments for Barb? It sounds exciting. The numbers are way up, it sounds like. All right, any final farewells for Ms. Langevin? Thank you very much, Barb.
Thank you. I so appreciate your time and your dedication.
And welcome, Pam.
Thank you.
So next up is our Soil and Water Conservation District with Rhiannon Landscape. The first resolution is modifying the 2022 budget for Forestry Department for increased funds awarded to the Stouffville Trail Grant. Moved by Ms. Perkins, second by Ms. Kerman. Hi, Rhiannon.
Okay. This is just a modification to reflect the increase in funds from when it was originally budgeted a year ago.
Okay, any questions? No? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Next resolution is authorizing the chair to sign the 2022-2023 local spots for signature for as part of the grant application to the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. Moved by Ms. Curran, second by Mr. Burke. Okay, man.
Okay, so this is our annual resolution to participate in the grant, and it requires the chair signature.
Okay, any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. The final resolution for soil and water is authorizing the chair to sign contracts with designated trail maintenance entities associated with the New York State Snowmobile Trail Grant Program. Moved by Ms. Curran, second by Ms. Arquette and Mr. Burke. Yeah.
Okay, as the board knows, we went to a 2 trail maintenance entity approach to the grant last year. And therefore we needed to sign these contracts. So this is just to authorize the chair to sign the contracts with these TMEs for the 22-23 season.
Any questions for Ed? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Public Health, Jolene Munger, with the resolution is authorized the chair to sign an agreement with St. Lawrence Health Initiative for the New York State Public Health Corps Fellowship Program. Moved by Ms. Curran, second by Mr. Smithers. Go ahead, Jolene.
Thank you. So this resolution is the follow-up to the discussion that we had at services. So this will allow us to sign an agreement with the St. Lawrence Health Initiative
Yeah, you're frozen.
to place 2 fellows in their organization. If for people to apply openings between the Public Health Department and St. Lawrence Initiative. There's 2 different ways you have to apply. One is with PCG. So if you go to Google and type in PCG and careers, it's listed as a St. Lawrence County Public Health Specialist. And then you also have to apply with the New York State Fellowship Program. So if you Google the New York State Fellowship Program, it will take you to the application form. Both applications do have to be filled out for your application to be considered.
Any questions for Jolene? Ms. Terminelli.
We have the application process streamlined on our website somehow, so it's more easily accessible.
So we are working on putting that up there. We just received some of the
You froze up again.
It's
Jolene.
true.
You were
What was
froze
that?
up. Yeah.
Oh,
Try again.
so a PCG is doing the actual hiring. So they've already started recruiting for this. They've had about 20 applicants. We don't know whether they're viable applicants or not. Some counties are allowing for remote options. As our county doesn't allow remote for its employees, we're not allowing our fellows to be remote. So they are going through and vetting the applicants right now for us. And if we still need more applicants after that, it will be posted on our website. We will also have information at the career fair.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Terminelli? Yeah, thank you, Jolene.
Thank you.
Good. So any questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Thank you, Jolene. So vacancy review committee is Ruth Doyle. First up is Tyler. And for building a motor equipment operator position.
Thank you. This position was vacated by an individual, actually a relatively short-term employee, but took a position where the town for hiring. So one of the issues that we're struggling with, as I spoke of earlier, to do the tasks that we need to do, struggling to retain and bring people on. But like to
get approval to police action. I would prefer it as well.
Questions to Mr. James? Ms. Perkins?
Do you know the difference between what we're offering and the other towns or wherever they're going?
That varies quite wide. Some of the towns are, this town is only maybe $1.50, but an hour, but I've seen somewhere it's $6, $7 an hour more. Varies depending on the town and municipality. But there's quite a spread. At this point, our motor equipment operator starts $18.
She says, if an applicant is interested and needs to acquire the CDL license, would we make that possible?
We cannot at this point, that is one of the recommendations. that we're- Becoming certified, have a certified training program where the county can actually do that. I think that is going to be imperative if we are going to be competitive in the market. I have looked into getting some of our own employees as certified trainers in federal regulations certified to do this. Create such a program.
Okay, Mr. Barrett?
Done benefit package is comparable between the county and the towns. I've heard that the county has a benefit package, health insurance, retirement.
Yeah, that's true, and that's why it's very hard to compare some, actually, maybe with the Teamsters Union, and it's not like CSEA where we have a very robust package. So they may offer considerably more per hour, but our benefits may be better, but that's still very difficult to attract somebody, they've got to pay their bills. And I've had individuals leave because, well, yeah, our benefits are better, but I'm getting more in my paycheck. It's when it's come down, unfortunately. People are making decisions between what they take home and what they get for benefits.
Mr. Reagan?
You were talking about developing a training program in-house for CDL training. Have there been any discussions between you and the IDA and the Crest Center with the program that they have?
Well, at this point, I believe there's only about 5 students that go through the program at a time, which I don't think is going to be public community at large. But also, people we have contact, and know that's available. Fee for that. So that's also a deterrent. When you're talking, paying somebody $18.70 an hour, asking them to spend $6,000 out of their pocket first before they even apply for jobs. The market's changed.
I know what Mr. Reagan said, we funded that program for only $287,000.
Right, we are putting money into the program for tuition assistance. And you might want to have, if you don't feel that Crest Center's producing enough, you might want to talk to them about, what can be done to expand it. And we have money going into it to train something like, what was it, Kevin, 160?
I'm saying it was 140, I may have my.
140.
I didn't remember the exact number, I thought 287, maybe it was.
But it's a significant number. So, I'm not sure how many people that you're planning on training, but this might help you not have to duplicate that training program.
I can tell you in the last 5 years, I believe we've had 55 individuals at this point that have come in and through the park. Basically, entry level. So the problem is going right back to salary. When they graduate and they have their CDL, they can go on the market. And I would gladly interview them if they apply. But I'm also going to be competing against the open market where I think that it might be in the best interest to look at hiring somebody without the skill set, training and to get the skill set at the department and keep trying to retain that. That's important. But I'd love to see their application.
Certainly, our expectation is that county employees would have to crack at it because it's county money, but Mr. Forsythe.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think they're paying a lot more, a lot of the different vendors are paying a lot more than $18.95 a day. We have a program in place with the commitment, like the hospitals will do and different organizations, 2-year commitment, we pay the cost of it. Is there anything
Part of the one
that's total?
there'd be some,
Because a lot of them is time.
same with the NT. That's practice.
Okay.
Mrs. Haggard.
Oh, Mr. Forsythe stole my question. That was
That's
exactly.
charge.
Yeah,
It's a
okay.
different thing.
So I was gonna say, how long, which I would ask them to enter into the contract to stay a certain amount of time.
And that's part of the county already does have a program, I believe, continuing education where there are requirements. I believe would be part of the discussion that we need to have, how that fits, how if we develop this program, how that's. That. I really think that right now, the position that I have, that's I'm looking for approval requires the CDL the day they walk in the store. So they've got to have the experience in order to get this position. So that's where I'm saying that I could fall short, and then we've got to initiate something where I have the ability to bring somebody in, give them a period of time to get the CDL license, and then I think we'd be more successful having the program and keeping them if we do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chambers. We'll move on to real property, and that's building a real property tax service aid. We have Mr. Green with us.
Yes, good evening. Tonight, we are looking to replace a recently vacated real property position of a real property tax aid. That person just resigned and left, and we're looking to replace that position. We have 3 in the office, and we're down to 2 right now. So they perform an integral part of our office and how they work with the assessors and put on new transfers and exemptions and stuff on the file. So that's what we're asking for tonight.
Any questions, Mr. Green? Okay. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have an American Rescue Plan update. Just this afternoon.
Sure. So a couple of updates in relation to our funds, decisions that have already been made and then those still pending. The contract has been signed with the governor and St. Louis County Fair, and 90% of those funds have been forwarded with requirements in the contract that will allow us to make sure we can claim funds in our reporting in the future. I will be meeting with Soil and Water Conservation District tomorrow on the Emerald-Ash-Borer funds that have been set aside to determine how that best works for their organization and the resources they have available. The second tranche or the balance of the 20.9 million have been requested. We have typically seen that at least the last time we received within 45 days of making that request. So we'll let you know when that arrives. Our hope was to have all of these funds spent out prior to that. Those funds arriving. In the discussion today that Chair Davis referenced, that was the IDA on the economic development component. and some of their preliminary ideas about how they would administer that, how they would seek input from folks in the county, and how they would administer those funds for those who end up being qualified. So out of that meeting, there's some additional work to be done. They hope to share back with us some more information about that process with some input from the group before the end of the week. So with that being said, there was an interest in potentially moving forward at the July meeting or a special board meeting in July to make sure we can get those economic development dollars out into the community as soon as possible. So we'll see what we get, share that out with the group, and should that be ready in that way. The nice thing at this time is our July board meeting is until the 11th. And here we sit on the 27th. So we have a little bit of time to work on that and make sure it meets the standards they're looking for before we put the contract approval through. So that's on ARPA. Any questions?
Mr. Burke?
Is there any capacity to help? Where I know the TV last night, Jefferson County, ICA, awarding grants, is that a possibility?
So there is, I don't have the document in front of me, it's on my desk. So we just went over this really quickly here at 3 o'clock, but there is a component in there. I actually brought it up because it's an area, it's a sector that people that own property that were renting out actually didn't access the program that the state implemented. I think something like 8%. I heard really low number, actually, of tenants or owners actually doing that. So that's a possibility. So like I said, Margaret was there, and Mr. Fay, and with Reagan and myself. So we did talk about that. That was the area that was kind of that category, which is, you have it in front of you, Jim?
No, I don't.
A lot of it was about employee training and that kind of thing. So this was a small business, nonprofit assistant. And so we talked about the amount of money that was in it. And we tentatively compromised and still have another discussion and stuff, where that would be, but that could actually possibly be a place that those monies could go. It's all fresh, military bond, so it's more of a presentation rather than to get bogged down in the details. So I don't know, do you have an idea about when you'd like to meet again, or you said something about this week, which maybe a little
They
bit.
can get everything out, the idea for review.
Stay tuned. Don't tell me if you're gonna be available, we'll still CC you. If not, we'll have that. Mrs. Haggard.
Send it.
Any other questions on
You will.
ARPA right now? I can continue on.
Yes, please.
So if you prefer, we do resolutions first.
Yep, okay, so the first resolution, the administrator's report, is modifying the 2022 budget for the county administrator's office for costs associated with court-ordered treatment services and New York State operated inpatient mental hygiene facilities. Moved by Mr. Burke, seconded by Ms. Curran.
So financial situation or pain, as it were, is all lined out for you in the resolution. You have already adopted this as a legislative agenda item, and we continue to have conversations both through community services and with the state about either reform to this regulation so that the legislature would have to take action on it, or reversing the regulation they made without legislative action to revert back to a more feasible setup. The 50-50 is what we've departed from. You've got the totals there. 2020 and 2021, 2.2 million. We are working on an average here. One of the things we never know is who's leaving and who's entering this care. And so we put our best minds to what we can predict for the year. But I also don't mind bringing this before you so that you can see the type of dollars we're looking at. Because they can be, and for many years, they were zero. But we've seen a spike in this and then shifting the balance of that 50-50 back. It's become extremely expensive.
Any questions for Mrs. Doyle? Mr. Smithers?
Can you give us any rationale from the state for their shifting the cost of this to the county?
We have yet to receive a reason or a response as to why that regulation was changed.
This terminology.
Are the rates that we inpatient facilities, are they state required, or how do they decide the rate that we pay? And are we getting to be able to haggle it down to the?
They have not been interested in negotiating, and I believe they set their own rates.
It's over $1,000 a day.
And I'm just thinking, you know, with insurance, right? If you don't pay your bill, a lot of times then you can go back and say, listen, this is what we're looking to pay.
For the record, Mr. Terminelli is saying, do not pay this bill. That's-
I mean, we have attempted to be creative.
So I think that Ms. Perkins has his hand up next.
This is something I think we should put on our legislative agenda.
It is, it is.
Ask them.
Yes, and we will certainly continue to approach that, particularly with the changes that are happening with the new legislative representation we get. We'll visit this. This is very expensive.
Ms. Curran.
I mean, there's posted medical care and Medicaid reimbursement rates. The county certainly should not be paying more than like Medicare reimbursement.
Okay, Mr. Denisha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just thinking about legislator Smoother's question. They can boil it down to because they can. It's like the sales tax. The state did away with the 8% municipalities. There was such an uproar. And they said, we'll put it back in budget, and we'll take it out of the county's sales tax. The aid to health facilities. We were not asked about it, it was just taken out. So I think this is just another example of they can do what they want to do.
No name on its own. Unfortunately, the aid to this balance is back in, right?
It's
But they're still hit this up for about 400 some thousand per hospital, right?
50%. The town's obligation's gone away. The city has gone from 200 million to 50 million. So I think it all resides in the city.
Good news. All those in favor, Mr. Forsythe.
Give me an example of what someone has to do to get. For this program.
Well, they are court ordered, and it is as a finding of being unfit to stand trial. And so they are evaluated as a part of that process. And at some points, they're identified or clinically determined to be able to stand trial. And so they are returned from wherever the locations are, that maybe Marcy's one of them. And then their trial is scheduled. But in many situations, we aren't privy to any more information than that, and who they are and how much we should pay for them.
Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye. Opposed, motion carried. The next resolution is adopt the proposed local law fee for the year 2022 for setting the salary of the county historian. Moved by Suzanne Bianco, second by Mr. Smithers. And Ms. West.
This is the second to last action from a committee standpoint that we'll take. If it's approved tonight, this will be set for public hearing in July. And then you'll also adopt the resolution that will provide for this local law to be on record. This will set the standard for statutory position within the county.
Okay, any questions for Mrs. Doyle? Seeing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Next up is the 2022 reserves recommendations and uses for the fund balance.
So last month, we heard from our treasurer on the unaudited results of 2021. And the outcome, as far as we know at this point, unaudited again, is very beneficial to the county. So we finished in the general fund with $12.2 million surplus for 2021. And each year since 2018, I've been tasked at this meeting with making a recommendation for reserves. So the board took action beginning in 2016, creating a fund balance policy. And then by 2018, you also made a determination that reserves were invested in the county. And that year we created two reserves, the employee accrued liability and the capital reserve. Those both were put into place, followed the next year by the self-insured health insurance liability component. This was the first year you tapped into that reserve and you purchased stop loss insurance, you may remember, of about $423,000. So we actually proved the value, not having to go to fund balance, of setting aside the money in reserve, identifying finally that we're at a place where it makes sense. Having looked at this year after year after year, it makes sense to make that acquisition, and we had the funds set aside to do it. That's exactly the model that we sold to you when the reserves were created. So this year, I'd like to, and every year since, make recommendation for increases associated with the performance of 2021. But I'd also like to make 2 additional recommendations to you for reserves to create out of the funds from 21. So the 3 I just mentioned, capital reserve for 2021, I would recommend an additional 1.5 million. So that takes away from that overall 12.2 I just referenced. And what that would do is match the contribution you made last year and take the capital reserve up to $5 million. And that's just one bucket, so to speak, of the overall general fund balance. So it's not more money, it's just a category that we'll use. The second one is the employee accrued liability. And my recommendation for that would be 500,000. Last year, we added 350,000 to the 1.15 million that was there. So that brings us to an even 2 million. And when we look at the total obligation sitting out there right now, it's right around that number. Now, granted, each time we provide raises, that accrued liability increases because it's based on the hour that the rates are. So in that way, I would consider this particular reserve fully funded at $2 million. And the last one that's currently existing is the self-insured health insurance liability. And this would be the most sizable contribution of the reserves that I would recommend this year. Last year, we added a duplicate of the year prior of 750,000. So currently we're at 1.5 million. And I would recommend adding 2 million to that so that we would be then at 3.5 million set aside in the liability of insurance reserve. So out of the 3 that already exist, my recommendation would be $4 million to be set into buckets, so to speak, of the general fund balance. Now let me talk about the 2 that I would propose you create this year. And these would also have to be created through resolution, so they would come before you for official action. But this again is just my recommendation. The first is a vehicle reserve for the sheriff's office. And what I would propose is, in years past, many of you have been around for long enough time to know when times were difficult, we reduced highway and we took the sheriff's cars away. And we said, run for another year. You'll be fine. So then they would come back and ask for 5. And I'm going back probably 15 to 20 years at this point. So they would start at 5 and we would wheel through the budget process down to annually, we look at about 2 years. This would set aside a reserve of 300,000. If you also recall, every year when we send vehicles to the auction, we have a category for county fleet and we have a category for sheriff's vehicles. And the sheriff's office taps into those funds to make new purchases. So we would make the recommendation that those funds from sheriff's vehicles that are purchased would go into this reserve. Therefore, continuing over time, it's not a lot of money each year, maybe $5,000 on a vehicle that's beyond its useful life with us. That would continue to help grow the process in that reserve. We would also request, have a conversation with the sheriff about making some contribution of equitable sharing toward this reserve as well. And he isn't opposed to it. The last item is one you're become acquainted with just this last week, is a reserve created to address blighted tax-acquired property in the county. And I would propose to start the investment of that fund at 200,000. So the 2 new reserves would be one for vehicles and one based upon the blighted properties that the county has already taken pre-tax foreclosure. They've not survived in the auction. They've sold and been walked away from, sold with complications, ones that we frequently see return to the auction process. That would give the treasurer's team and county attorney's team the ability to determine which properties should be addressed through this fund. Annually, you get updates quarterly, even when action's taken, so that you can track where these properties exist and how we propose to address them. So overall, just to revisit, capital reserve would be 1.5 million. Employee accrued liabilities, 500,000. The health insurance liability is 2 million. The sheriff's vehicle reserve would start at 300,000. And the blighted property reserve would be 200,000. Now, that sum total is 4.5 million of the overall 12 million. We would set aside those and leave the remainder for another topic we're going to talk about in a second. That will take our overall reserve total from 6.5 million to 11 million. And this contribution would be 41% investment in our overall reserve capacity for 2021. Last year, we contributed 24% in 2.6 million to continue to build our reserves. In the prior 2 years, of this 11 million, it was 36%. So the board is demonstrating through the reserves, the ability to move funds out of the performance, not additional funds from the taxpayers, into reserves so we're better prepared in each of those categorical areas. Questions?
Mr. Forsythe.
I need right now. I understand the plus. I understand it wholeheartedly. Last year, I proposed at budget time, coming up with a 10% property tax, approximately based on $4.5 million to reduce property taxes. But last year, it was because we had a fund balance policy that we had to achieve, which now we've achieved. We've achieved the fund balance policy. Now we're creating new fund balance. And 10% property tax never goes away. So are we saying to the board, we're happy with the tax rate in St. Lawrence County at $8.19? Or do you think that we can strive to knock that down?
Well, let me get to the second part, and I hope that will help answer your question.
Okay.
Okay. So out of the performance of this, of 2021, the 12.2, we also looked at and heard the board about spending down some of the fund balance and understanding the importance of some major areas of concern. And that seems to always be highway. And so in one of our last meetings, we talked about paving and the challenge we have with 573 miles of road to maintain, how each year we plug away around 30, depending on the market will be or what commodity prices, in trying to make progress. And so there was a conversation about one, how many miles are we short, considering the increase in costs? And the second part was, what if we paved an additional set or additional number of miles of road? So I asked the highway superintendent, who's come back, and that resolution will be before you shortly. But important to note, spending down some of this, being able to do additional work is also one of the benefits of having fund balance that we didn't have in years past. We couldn't say, we were borrowing $12 million. We couldn't say, let's go ahead and pave some miles of road. Now we can say, let's spend down some cash. And my goal was, let's equally split what we're investing in reserves and what we're going to spend down. The second piece of the overall cash spend would be the $3 million we're looking to pay out of the general fund for the second highway outpost, which allowed us to finance less money from the $6 million down to $3 million. Going forward, our debt obligation would be half of what we anticipated when we started the capital project. So overall, the first part of this discussion was, let's do additional paving, make up what was budgeted, and do an additional 10 miles of paving. And then the second part was, let's pay for 2 outposts out of our fund balance rather than 1, and let's assume less debt. We got a great credit rating in our last Standard & Poor's review, and now we'll carry that obligation until 2032. So those 2 would total, at least in its first instance, $4.8 million. So out of the 12, we would set aside 4.5 for the reserve buckets, and we would spend 4.8. And the balance of that equation is, we just saw increases today for the paving, that we may need an additional $300,000 to make that 10 miles. But we'll talk about that with the resolution. But initially, the reserve buckets would be divided for 4.5. Otherwise, let's say you didn't want this recommendation, that 4.5 would go directly to the general fund, unreserved, unappropriated. And it can do that. But the task that was given to the reserves was to identify those for a board recommendation. Any other questions before I move on to fund balance policy?
Mr. Burke.
Are you going to talk about highway next?
Yes,
There's a resolution.
2 of them actually. For both of those actions, they require board action. And Don will come up and speak to specifics.
I'll wait.
Okay? Other questions?
No, Mr. Reagan.
Back to the blighted property program. We're setting aside $200,000 for trying to do something with blighted properties. Will this program apply to Ogdensburg as well?
I don't think any properties in the county, certainly the county attorney. Mayor, would be excluded from it. One of the things we talked about in the meeting just prior to this was the importance of them developing the policies and procedures around this, and also identifying in the auction how we continue to fund it like the NRS. But I can find that out for you, or
Well,
Renee.
if you remember, Renee can probably speak for it, but the specifics last meeting was that we had maybe 24 properties that keep coming back on to the tax sale. So if somebody bids on it and walks away from the bid, we end up with it, and we still have the villages, the school district hold. So what this would be actually doing is taking some of the profits, which we've had the last 3 years with Options International, utilizing those funds, not taxpayer monies, but those funds actually to clean up actually some of those blighted properties. So say we're in the village of Madrid, and there's a house that's foreclosed in such bad shape that nobody wants to buy it or they back away. The county would pay, with hopefully with the contribution from the village of Madrid towards the actually taking that property down. The other choice would be that we would say, okay, no contributions, we don't want to do this. But we really don't want to start keep making school districts and towns and villages whole. We can take those off the roll, which would not be popular. Each individual legislator in that particular legislative district would come back, you're screaming. The idea is to use those monies, those profits, and it would be done in years that there were those profits that would be utilized, that some of these properties could be cleaned up and go back on the tax list. Renee, did you want to add?
Right, but my point is that in the past, because Ogdensburg handled its own, they never had benefited from the contaminated oil cleanup process. And I just want to know if now, under the new procedures, whether or not properties that the county acquires in the city of Ogdensburg, whether the city, those properties will be considered for the blighted program as well.
So I know like in our committee, we had a bit of a discussion about the villages and how the policy would be written about whether or not we could get contributions from townships or villages towards a particular property. So, Renee, would you like to speak to this? You brought this forward at the last meeting.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yes, Ogdensburg properties will be able to, since this was the first year that we sent a property tax bill, it will take some time for those properties to go through our cycle. Unpaid taxes on those parcels that we billed in January turn delinquent in this June. So I believe they will be eligible to go into the foreclosure auction. Not that that's a goal, but for the 24 auction, if my math is correct. So the Ogdensburg properties will, they just have to work themselves through the cycle.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear. I appreciate it. And I think over the long term, having the county selling some of these vacant properties in the city of Ogdensburg will benefit the city of Ogdensburg as well as the county, help get them back on the tax rolls, and also assist with addressing the problem of some of the blighted properties that no one will buy, not just in Ogdensburg, but across the county. So I think this will be a long-term benefit to everyone in the county. And I appreciate the effort by the county treasurer, the county administrator, the county attorney to develop this. And thank you for your efforts.
It will be specific for both properties.
Right.
Anything else? Thank you, Renee.
Okay, so the second portion of the recommendation is one that the board can make to me for fund balance appropriation going into the 2023 budget process. So each year I come to you and we start out generally, and I'll make the same recommendation this year at 0.5%, which in this budget would equate to 1.3 million. But the board's given me latitude throughout the budget process to recognize, much like Legislator Forsythe pointed out, that we are getting closer to that amount. So if you wanted to spend down as proposed with paving and with capital project, we get a little more distant from that fund balance number. Now that we're at, and that's pointed out here, which I'll share this document with all of you, that overall number going forward would be 1.3 million with a $260 million budget. So what happens is this year, as you can see on the chart or mentioned to you, 730,000 is always set aside for the fund balance appropriation. In years past, for the last 3 years, we set aside 1.5 million. Prior to that, 1.65, and then its first year, 1.1. So this year, we're recognizing we're getting closer to that number. We don't need as much set aside to reach that. And then we end up with a year like we've had with overperformance and lots of savings. So the reality is we're respectful of the fact we're getting closer. We don't need to set aside as much. However, the goal to start, unless there's an objection, will be 0.5%. In general, if we were to budget the full percent and follow the policy to its finest letter, we would put that on the taxpayer to begin with and then reap the benefits. We've never seen that as a positive. We try to balance that. This year, I think it's 0.29 of 1%. But then you close the year and you see how you eclipse that by at least 4 or 5%. So that's the fund balance policy recommendation. If there's an objection to that or an alternative option, let me know. As we go through the budget process, I can keep you apprised as what that's looking like. I'm certainly expecting some changes in the budget this year, cost of purchases alone, along with 7 contracts closed and in place, which all have increases included. So I'm not sure how the budget year is going to shake out just yet. We're starting that process. And at next month's finance meeting, you'll see on the second quarter results. And there are some areas where we'll be going ahead and asking you to make budget modification and highway 20. So that you're well aware of the cost of everything, even in the personal lives that we're spending. Those are also impacting other departments as well. So questions on either of those?
Mr. Lightfoot.
My question, comment. I think it needs to be brought up every once in a while that we're looking at the building out on Richmond 10, going back to the Village of Canton. Unless something happens in what, 7 years, 8 years?
2030.
Okay. So then we would be looking for office space, either renting it from the village or the town, or the village, or the possibility of requiring new space, new building. The other part of that is that we still owe upwards of $20 million on the jail. And I don't know when the term on that expires, but is it about 20 years?
30. Bond was.
I know bond is for 30, but we're well into that.
Yeah.
So I think those things have to be kept in mind. Plus, as you said, price of blacktop just went up $20 a ton overnight. Well, literally overnight. We can't get people to come to work for the county because our wages are too low. That's huge. And we're looking at running into a wall here pretty quick. I see nothing wrong with putting money away in times of good, because the bad times will come. This isn't going to last forever. And I think the pricing of commodities and the everyday things that we need to live are going out of sight. And it's not only going to affect the individual, it's going to affect government and industry and everything else. So I'm very much in favor of, if we could put it in the bank when we have it, that's the time to do it. That's what you're doing exactly. And I think you're following exactly what this board, the majority of this board, wants to see.
Anyone else? Tax rate actually is $8.02. 8.19 was the previous year. And the last 6 out of 7 years, we've actually lowered taxes, and on that 7th year, we were stable. So my expectation is we will be under $8 for sure, and we're making significant contributions to our infrastructure. It's huge that we're able to pay for 2 of these sites, it's $6 million. Just by not having a bond for that last $3 million will save us $500,000 in interest over that. I think it was a 14-year period. That was at the current interest rates, which I think have risen at that time. So the fact that we can pay cash and save $500,000, that's a pretty good sign. These are just good investments. I think it's a great recommendation. Yes.
So the other thing I just wanted to mention to legislator Lightfoot's point about our debt obligations are limited, just so that you have a handle on that. In 2026, we'll pay off the $3 million highway bond. If you'll remember, we used to pay for equipment as we started this resurgence of replacing. In 2030, that's when the CHSI bond will come due. That will certainly require board action and the village board as well. We will then in 32 pay off the obligation we're taking now for the highway outposts. And then we'll look in 36 to 38 to pay off the jail. We also have our energy performance contract. I'm not sure when that closes, but we're trying to limit our debt obligations. In the same time, interest rates were good. There was a great reason to take some debt at the time. It's building a portfolio of responsibility based upon some of the projects that we've undertaken in the last few years. Okay. Shall we consider resolutions? Now?
Sure. So the first resolution is addressing the impact of the cost of materials on the 2022 paving budget, authorizing an additional 10 miles of paving and modifying the 2022 budget for the Department of Highways for paving project. Moved by Mr. Smithers, second by Mr. Fay, Mr. Lightfoot, and Mr. Forsythe. Mr. Fay.
I amend resolution. We've already talked about costs going up, and we're already at, I believe that our superintendent can tell us another $300,000 you expect to spend on this. So I'd like to amend the resolution to change to 2.1 million.
Is there a second to that? Second by Mr. Curran, Mr. Burt, and Mr. Lightfoot. Mr. Chambers.
Yes, the original paving plan this year called for 34.65 miles of paving in various county roads. I have submitted a list of that, and you do have a map. However, I was asked also to look at coming up with an additional 10 miles. With the process that we normally would do, call for evaluating all cross culverts that would be underneath the road and need to be replaced before we pay. So my recommendation in order to accomplish this would be to recycle the current roads and apply for the permits for changing the culverts that are necessary, and change the culverts under this additional 10 miles in the 2023 calendar year, and surface treat those areas that are recycled to maintain that roadway, and, open and plowable and traversable over the winter, and then in the following year replace those culverts and then replace the top course. So there would be no patches or anything in the roadway, and allow time for settlement or whatever. So that would be a way to accomplish getting 10 additional miles, basically pay, recycle, and surface treatment, and then take the other portion, final course on in 2023 with chip spawnings. This would in effect give you 10 more miles of road that is in sort of needed repair. The list and that has that listed on the various roads that are on there. If you'd like, I can go over those, but I would like to address where we started from, and I was initially putting our budget together in March of the type 7 and top is what we typically put on our roads. The bid price was $55.62 a ton. Now, on a monthly basis, we have an asphalt and fuel adjustment as posted by the New York State OGS and New York State DOT, which automatically adjusts the payment that we make based on commodities market. So it's an automatic adjustment that we have to give to the vendor supplying the products. So like I said, in March, the bid was $55.62. In April, with the automatic adjustment, it went to $58.05. In May, it went to $63.08. In June, it went to $67.79. In July, the price, the adjustment just came out for July at $71.32. So we've had between almost 5 and 10% increases per month in the commodity price. So it's been very difficult to maintain the budget when we're getting increases of 5 to 9% per month increase in cost. So unfortunately, that's where we have that. So, fortunately, coming to you will change that. I do have a map that we put together since 2014 where we have paid, and there it is colored key. And what we had proposed for 2022, and then in green is the additional 10 miles. So when you look at it, the county map says where we've been since 2014. I think it's quite impressive.
You can share this.
Yeah.
I don't know why you guys.
Well, right, it is on a full-size map, that's what you see up there, so, but it is quite impressive where we have been and what we have done. So I do want to thank the board for the support that they've given my project over
Mr.
When you share that, can you also share that with the press?
Mr. Burke.
I think it's a great idea, even 10 miles. Just I'm wondering, the interplay between paving the 10 miles and the chips. I don't know that I understand that. In the previous conversation, I understood that you kind of pulled off when we get chips. I'm wondering if we do the extra 10 miles, the impact on chips. Are we subsidizing the state?
I assure you, we'll always have miles to pay with the CHIPS funds that are available. We certainly, at this point, we've been typically doing around 30 miles of road a year. We're at 573 miles of paving the roads that, the CHIPS funds only allows us to get to the roads about every 21, 22 years. That is far too long of time horizon to be waiting. So that's one of the reasons why we've got basically a deficit of roadways that we need to get to. So, we should be more in the neighborhood, honestly, of total lanes within the, around the 10 to 12 year period, not the 21, 22 year period. So we have plenty of roads to do.
Well, the map is in the highway folder on Google Drive. So it's there. I'm good with Google Drive, it's in your highway folder. All right, so we have an amendment and let's vote on the amendment. All those in favor of Mr. Bay's amendment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Now as to the amended resolution, the totality of it, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Thank you.
The next resolution is modifying the 2022 budget for the Department of Highways to utilize additional fund balance for the capital project construction of highway facilities in the towns of Lisbon, Potsdam, and Russell. Moved by Mr. Smith, second by Mr. Arquette.
No amendment needed here, the milling will do it. But I'll have Mr. Chambers speak to progress made on that facility.
Thank you. Basically, we are finishing up the concourse items on our Lisbon and both the Russell outpost. The fuel systems are out to bid, so we will be doing that. So that is a task that needs to be finished on all 3 sites. We have purchased tanks that they're still out on order. And now the electronic system that goes along as well as the camera system. Going to be there as well. So we'll be getting those bids and then kind of, for the most part, the facilities for Russell and Lisbon are for the most part complete. Like I said, going into the 90-some% finishing up functions. The Potsdam facility was turned over to the contractor June 1, as was in the contract. County Forces did a lot of brick moving work and made an access road and basically the parking area and used a considerable amount of earth to flatten the area to accept for the building foundations and also used brush trees that were in the way for the development as well. So, County Forces are working on that through the winter and into the spring to turn that over. The foundation for the truck garage at Potsdam location has before. The contractor is now working on the wall forms for that and for the truck storage building, and they are working on the footing forms for the sand salt storage. Things are moving right on schedule with that as well. So, good, real good progress.
Was that part of the bid that they would be on a level site
Yes, that
in the roadway?
we figured that would be the best way to put that forward. Save money by utilizing that, cutting the trees while we were on snow and ice operations. If there was data, we had personnel that was working on snow and ice operations. We were cutting trees and brush and working on that site compared to save the county as much money as possible.
Of course,
Thank you. Earlier you mentioned the site at Lisbon for the recycling. You got it tentative, just out of the blue. I know you got some sort of number, so can you just give me an out of the blue?
This is, we're still difficult numbers. That you're.
Let's narrow it down a little
Maybe our truck investments will probably be somewhere close to 2 million.
Fair enough.
And the bid schedule is such that they'll go up soon, so I think we'll have an idea in another 4 or 5 weeks.
Scary your numbers.
only gonna build a million and a half, so. So, any more questions from Mr. Chambers? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Don.
Couple other items to give you by way of update, with regard to the workforce, recruiting and retention. Our human resources will be attending the Department of Labor North Country Region virtual job fair tomorrow, or on Wednesday, from 11 to 2, and there'll be a banner, if it's not up already, on our website so that folks can join. I'm not sure how a virtual job fair works, but I'm excited to hear how human resources finds the attendance, enable ability to get information out about county jobs. Also on this week, as a reminder, on Thursday, we're having our county job fair at the Human Services Center from 8 to 4. So if you are in the neighborhood, stop out, see folks, and visit with our departments as they put forward their needs in terms of staffing out to the public. Wanted also, as I mentioned, to let you know, we're looking at the waiver. There's been a couple of conversations about waiving certain exam fees. So we're taking a look at that, and we'll bring you an action so that you can take official action if that makes sense for the type of exams we're talking about. So we're working on that. In the way of projects, the Buildings and Grounds Committee met, and we introduced our new superintendent, Jim Trapman, who started with us last week. He was able to sit in, I think, on his very first full day with a committee meeting to get a sense of the group, but also to understand where we are with our projects. And also just to let you know that there's been a hazardous mitigation grant submitted by the county for a couple of our needs to be met. Typically, we're working with other municipalities on their identified needs. This time, one's been submitted that we provide, if awarded, with full generator power to the Human Services Center, as well as a stormwater issue that many of you are aware of, running off of Court Street here into the atrium area. And that travels all the way through this entire block. So our hope is that we'll be awarded those. My understanding is we should hear about that in the fall. So we'll keep you posted on that. Speaking of Google Drive, I mentioned of where the map's located. We're looking at a couple of things I've mentioned to you. Certainly with the new term of the board coming in, we'd like to find an agenda management system. So our hope is to put out an RFP for that. I can tell you that since 2002, at least, if not before, the function and form you see before you is what we have utilized through Word. We're also looking at the Google structure and a few different opportunities. I know the school districts are well immersed in document sharing and all of that. I believe that the next aspect of communication that makes it easier than filling up inboxes and email and trying to find information. You can share information much more collaboratively between departments. So those two things are areas of interest for us. We would like very much to also explore the tablet, laptop, or iPad environment for legislators to make it more versatile and more useful for the purposes and functions you need as a legislator. So those areas, we're hoping to issue an RFP on agenda management. We're looking at options relative to document management county-wide. As you all know, we work between systems of the state and the county. And so in every scenario, it won't be possible. But where it is, I think it makes a lot of sense. And sort of that next step, you know, computers were supposed to save us all this time. And then we went and complicated it by making all this much more information available. So this may be a way to condense what we have sitting out there, but also make it more shareable and a better version available in shorter time. Any questions on that? And then lastly, I just wanted to mention, next month, I'd like to bring you an update on our cybersecurity efforts. But that will be followed by a little bit of homework. You will have the opportunity to take the education component, which is about 15 minutes, associated with our Know Before training. And this is a strategy we utilize with all of our employees. And considering you're all involved with the technology that we utilize, it makes a lot of sense both for you to hear, you know, high level understanding of where we are with cybersecurity efforts, as well as to certify as Know Before training legislators. Questions?
So at the Human Services building for natural gas, the generator that we're looking at,
Oh, I'm not sure.
so, and it's a significant building, which would be a significant cost, and if we're not going to own that building by the year 2030, at what point in time does this board think that we should be in discussion with the village about what's going to happen?
I would certainly think anytime you do a good time in that discussion.
7 years out.
And that's also why grant funding would be a better source of funding than to add it to our levy. We do carry the responsibility to maintain all functions and turn it over in pristine condition. So that will mean the roof before we turn it over. That will mean, as you're all very familiar, with the parking lot in usable condition. So there's a number of things I think that we need to address in that area. We are, and we currently have generator power in public health clinic. When we looked at that, we looked at full building power. And it was at that time in the high 300,000s. So we looked at only having the clinic online so that we had the ability to continue power for vaccines and important storage that takes place in the public health clinic. But that was the extent of it, because for the most part, the offices there are Monday through Friday. They don't extend through the weekend. However, we learned in the pandemic, there's very good reason that they'll be working around the clock and on the weekends. And so we revisited that, an opportunity came through with hazard mitigation, and so we're pursuing.
Yeah, so we'll move on to committee reports. First up, Cornell Cooperative Extension, the student nation.
Last meeting was Tuesday, May 25th, and some highlights. As of today, Ag Studies Academy is full at 20 students right all. Both the farm day camp and the 4-H camp overlook are full. Staff training is underway this week, which is great news, given what we experienced last year. In extension, just received the 3rd round of farm to school funding in partnership with BOCES. 2-year $99,000 reward to produce processed produce that is locally grown. And that goes to, we have 21 participating schools. So it's all good news for public protection. And the next meeting is Tuesday, July 26th.
Does it not hurt any count? We represent are the only ones that are not participating in that program, Mr. Denisha?
Who's next?
Okay. Fish and Wildlife Management Board. Current.
Hi, there's last meeting was June 16th. We finally got out our March minutes for Fish and Wildlife. So everyone will find in their email the full Fish and Wildlife meeting. There's a lot to it. Everything from the muskrat trapping season, how they're laid out by division, to what happened to the fishers that they were tracking in the forest. So I apologize for the pictures of different things that were built in the community. Some of them are upside down. So the new proposed regulations, how it's going to affect fishing and hunting this fall, the different takes of bear season, and deer season. But kind of the most important thing that figures into our world is the cormorant management system. Those birds all different fish, fish, and what they're going to do to try to cut down the numbers. It's going to this year they're going to do a lot of egg oiling at these different islands to try to keep them procreating in fashion that they have been. You go down anywhere in your boat in the St. Lawrence River, you'll find them everywhere. There's a couple of islands that they've overtaken, and literally there's been so much bird traffic that none of the boats there anymore. So as soon as the June minutes come out, I'll be sending them off.
Okay. Thank you. Fisheries Advisory Board, Mr. Manelli.
Thank you. So our last meeting, when I say our, myself and Bob Clayton, last meeting was on May 24th, the team of two. So we didn't have an official meeting, but it was just nice to catch up. He actually shared with me, and then ironically enough, it was followed up at our PMC meeting about the fish tagging that they're doing along the St. Lawrence River with the telemetry arrays, so that they can study the ecology, population, all of that. So it was pretty neat. We had some pictures of some of the transmitters that are anchored down to the bottom of the St. Lawrence. And they send out an acoustic signal. I'm not even going to try to wrap my head around it, but they send out an acoustic signal that allows them to track the fish, just to get a movement up and down the St. Lawrence. That's walleye, primarily what we do this with. And it's non-invasive as far as the tracking goes. And then they release the transmitters every so often. They download the data, and each walleye has its own individual tracker in there with its own like PIN number, so they can actually look at each fish and its movement up and down the St. Lawrence River. So pretty neat. And this is at the EMC meeting, they shared with us that this is a bi-nation project that originated out of a company in Michigan. And so they're working to collaborate as much as they can to just track the fish population movement and see where we need to be concerned about. So that was pretty much, and he told me about the fishery fertilization process that goes, from April to mid-May with the walleye. And our next meeting is July 26th at 7 o'clock in the basement.
The tournament last weekend there in Washington, there had to be 150 boats and trailers. And so I drove through there to see where they're from. And they're Maine, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maryland, Pennsylvania. A lot of New York places. I know people from Connecticut and Rhode Island.
Was that just for walleye?
Yes, it's my understanding that it's just walleye. They will be able to, they're looking at doing the fields as well.
Yeah, maybe black bass, because those guys wanted them, they took all the ones from our way. I'm curious if we need to look at.
So that is a considered project that was shared with one of the presenters at the EMC meeting. I'll update you on that. It is something that potentially happened down the road. That would take an investment from either the county or the community to buy the transmitters. They would volunteer the time, but they need the investment of the transmitters to be able to do that.
We don't care about Mr. Smithers.
Yes, the government fair board's been meeting every Tuesday, first Tuesday of every month. And they're planning for the fair, the upcoming events that they have scheduled for the grounds. The tent revival, which is scheduled for July 7th, 8th, and 9th in the evening, and 14, 15, and 16. It's advertised as being non-denominational, many area churches participating. Boy Scouts are scheduled to be there again on July 21st to the 24th. They've used some of the funding that was provided to expand the camper row by 6 units. Each one is now 30 feet by 45 feet. And the plans are to do renovations to the youth building, hopefully by the opening of the fair, which is scheduled for August 2nd, with us meeting there August 1st to start the fair. Events planned, popular racing pigs Wednesday through Saturday, open rides on Wednesday at 1 o'clock, wristbands available at $25 online in advance. Sylvia Brown is coming Tuesday, August 2nd. Fireworks are scheduled for July 5th. Band day is Wednesday. And Sean Peck says he's got 7, maybe 8 bands scheduled to attend. Friday's a tractor pull. Saturday night is a free concert, and Sunday's demolition derby. That's about it. Now, the next meeting is scheduled for July 6th.
So next up is highway and solid waste. Do you really have anything to add after tonight's presentation?
John did a great job of presenting information. So, in the
Good. Thank you, Mr. Stubbs. The IDA, sure.
Mr. Chair, the IDA met and reviewed the ARPA program and developed categories as had been suggested during a meeting with the ARPA committee, and met today to review those with the committee, and we'll be meeting again soon to refine it before it's brought to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Recreational Trails Advisory Board, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you. I'd like to, I've done this many times in the past, send sincere thanks out to our volunteers. This has been an exceptionally wet spring. As you know, it's caused a lot of additional trail maintenance, and Debbie does a great job, and her team. There's just so many volunteers, and not volunteers, trade equipment. Some volunteers that were working on the Aiken's fields last week. I suggested fuel, because the fuel's up there, and the fuel really take fuel. So I really extend my appreciation out to all of those volunteers. Beyond that, we're right at about 1,364 trail passes for this year. This is our second year, as we all know. To put that into perspective, we reconciled last year at the end of the year with 1,326. So we exceeded last year, and we're still in a good year. And I believe that with the existing, some of these runs that are going on, it's drawing folks in from outside of the county, which has been our plan all along. So, we all know that the trail pass sales, the beginning of the season would be the greatest number, but with these runs and folks coming in, there's potential to increase this number.
There's been some publicity about the sheriff's vehicle, and I think hopefully people are self-regulating themselves.
Absolutely. We look forward to the interaction.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Webb. RBRDA's Foresight.
The CDIP applications are out, they've been graded. We will meet July 14th to award the contract, so that's about it. We haven't mentioned.
Yeah, good. St. Lawrence County Chamber of Commerce, Mrs. Tiger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The St. Lawrence County Board or Chamber of Commerce met on June 9th. I'm going to keep it short tonight. I promise. Well, The Bass Nation Northeast Regional Championship was held on the St. Lawrence River. We referred to it tonight. There were 140 boats, just so you know, 250 anglers, and many of them brought their families and stayed for the week in the county. The chamber partnered with the Village of Waddington to host the event, including logistics of traffic management, insurance permitting, broadcasting, etc. The anglers from across the Northeast and Ontario, many fishing in the St. Lawrence for the first time, had a great experience. The tournament weigh-ins, were streamed on Bassmaster.com, and numerous articles were distributed through the National Fishing Network, drawing tremendous media exposure to the St. Lawrence River and to the county. This tournament was funded through one of the Market New York grants. And the only other thing I want to point out was the chamber is looking to hire someone to provide photos and written descriptions of day experiences from the ATV trails. So the post are more helpful to visitors. So if anybody's interested in that, we're here for 20, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hager. So the NAR, we beat this month. You have anything to report, Jack? Okay, so next up is old and new business. Does anyone have any old business? Mr. Burke.
I know we postponed the discussion of the information department until the operations meeting next month. But I wanted to bring up a little bit new information that should be factored into consideration. And I guess maybe the first thing would be, if we're going to look at the department, it's not isolated, just two positions. Let's take a look at all the positions. There's money to be saved. Let's save it. Keeping in mind that our innovation systems are more salary than our innovation officers. And I think, Suzanne has done a little bit of research as to case leads comparison. And again, this is in the context of adding information that should be considered as we move forward as to what's the best way to address this. I mean, is that okay?
Sure.
So even just from, like, say, this, back in the day, cases have increased. People, also other counties, some of the PAs in PSI work. Some of them have advertising to the current, other counties go along that. And sure, my
Bruce sent out some information. I have not seen it. I don't know when you sent it. Middle of the day. This is Haggard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I looked at that information quickly, and when I looked at the column that said how many cases there were, it was like 771.
so you have all the titles, not the names.
Yes.
And all of their cases separated out. So there's a type of case probation assistants can handle, and supervision case that probation officers handle. So that's hopefully.
So are cases duplicated here? I didn't think we had 771.
Department wide. I believe that was the representative.
Okay. Yeah, I hope we get back talking about that because it's something we're talking about turnover and keeping employees, 1-year employees, and when did we do that discussion?
Operations.
Operations.
Yeah, so if there's more questions that come out of reviewing the data, let us know. We'll get that prepared and sent out as well.
Thank you.
John, Mr. Burt?
During the same period of time, the department had took a look at completion statistics that I believe started in 2016 at the present time. The numbers went from 680 some down to 220 thereabouts. So there has been a drastic decrease in number. Staffing decreased by 50%. Therefore, we now have 2. In 3 years, it was 16, 17, and 18. Ratio of the assistants to their caseload was 1 to 150. Today it's 1 to 113. Utilization of those positions is 75%. So the other 25% is certainly an area of concern. Probation officers, same period of time, their utilization has dropped to 72%, less than what the systems are. Yes.
This is a table resolution. I don't have anything in front of me. I don't have any. When you're throwing out numbers, and I get it, but can you share them with us in paper form, like electronic?
Listen, my only
That's
reason.
the only thing I'm thinking it's got to do with, I don't know what.
Well, I do know, parliamentary procedure, Mr. Button, we're having a discussion, right? Yes, we're discussing a resolution that's been tabled.
It's tabled.
Motion
to remove it from the table.
Right.
I'm not talking about the resolution. I'm talking about additional information for consideration. And it has to do with information. So, if you want the additional information, or would you prefer to go down your little blind path and do what you want to do? This is information you should be considering to make a rational decision. Now, you want it or you don't. Whether it's this is new business, I wasn't of the belief that we have to be pigeonholed into what we talk about. This is relevant information about the probation office.
So I'm gonna rule in favor of the point of order. I think Mr. Burke can bring that information in operations when that comes forward.
You can't close the conversation down.
Well, I'm gonna rule on the point of order that was made by Mr. Forsythe. And so because that we were discussing a resolution or information that's been tabled to operations, I believe it's operations in July, let's move on. Is there any new? I don't need Mr. Button to make this decision. I've made the decision, but we can consider that, but I'd like to move on. Does anyone have any new business? Mr. Arquette?
Well, it's not, it's more than new business.
Well, you can vote, but we can do, actually, I hold up. Well, wait, Mr. Arquette, I ruled on the point of order. So what we can do is, and I ruled. And so what we can do is, if you don't accept that, we can take a general vote, and that's how it's done. So what the body can do is you can override my point of order, the point of order with my ruling is. So I would say all those in favor of overruling my decision that this is a improper discussion for a table resolution, you put up your hand. So all those that are in favor. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it fails.
Another point. Since when is the chair of finance rule on the point of order? Steve? When does the chair of finance rule on the point of order?
Chair actually has control of his meeting. The parliamentarian would typically be asked the question, as I believe I was. However, the chair does have the ability to rule. the body does have the ability to override the decision of the chair by a majority vote. It's a simple majority vote.
Then done so, and it failed. Correct? 5 votes, you overruled.
I would share. I would suggest Mr. Burke put the information he's going to talk to us, or wants to talk to us tonight on this here. Send it out to all the legislators who can look at it and be ready for the operations committee meeting. Talk about the numbers and talk about the statistics.
Okay, any new business? Mr. Perkins.
Thank you. Last Thursday, we had quite a storm in Hopkinton and Nickelville, washed out some roads. River Street was undercut, probably quarter of the road maybe done. Probably a 60-foot drop right there to the river. Trees fell down, big trees, and just washed them away. Lake Azonia Road had similar issues, washed out a culvert. 345 State Route 345. No. 458, get the numbers all mixed up. 458 was washed out really bad. I guess Ruth and Bill Sheridan had driven across that on Thursday night. Water was going across the road. There's probably 70 feet, I believe, on that road that got undercut. And if you stand on the road, on the east side of it, it's just like the old Batman movie. You're standing at an angle. And I guess I was just wondering where we are with the state of emergency. I've been having a lot of questions. I don't think it's been signed yet. Has not. And where will we be at that with that?
So I've spoken to Bill, he didn't have any objection to declaring a council, or I talked with council about the authority that the chairman has to declare on behalf of the town. So through executive law 24B, the chairman can declare for the county as a whole or small municipalities within the county. And so there's an interest that sounds expressed in having the town of Hopkinton declare a state of emergency, which would provide eligibility to them should they be a threshold for damages across the town roads as Bush and Perkins has described. There's no objection that would get it to them tomorrow.
Does that include any private roads? I had a phone call from a gentleman today. They have roads that goes back to their camp. It's a private road, but the DEC used it to get back to their Champion property. Is that covered underneath this as well?
Chambers, can you answer that?
Usually that has to be a public, and then just like we had up on the St. Lawrence River, where you had public and private were separate. This would be, if it's not a public roadway, probably would not be eligible under that portion.
Do you know if there's funding available for that? I mean, I know
Usually that's a separate, and that's under if they meet threshold for, if the community meets threshold for the disaster event.
Okay.
Public assistant and the public and private are two separate arrangements.
So Ruth has informed us, we need an executive session. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
New business?
Like, we covered new business.
Oh, we're not allowed to do
Well,
anymore?
go ahead, Mrs. Packard, you have new business.
Thank you. And it'll be brief.
Thank you.
It's come to my attention that many of the SNAP programs in the county are deficient in their funding and contributions. It's a very important program that is staffed by volunteers and generous people contributing to it. I don't think there's an avenue through ARPA funds to fund that, but I'd very much like to have the woman that is in charge of it, Roxanne, perhaps come and tell us about the program that she started, and I know the one in Messina is in trouble too. And if there's an avenue for us to be supported in some way, I know working in the schools off and on, there are a lot of little kids and big kids that take food home in a bag on Friday afternoon because they don't have adequate food at home over the weekend. So if there's no objection to that, I would like to speak to her about coming to the meeting. And one of you, Ruth, you could suggest to me which meeting would be best for her to speak.
Ms. Stern.
So we kind of go into something Nicole and I were talking about. This is sort of a push to try to consolidate some of these food-based programs. Because if you get consolidation of your county, then you can get some more USDA stuff. I have someone that's I'm saying in August to talk about consolidation. If you wanted to bring that sort of, but if you want to bring that to operation.
Great, thank you.
Is there a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Okay. Categories.
So we need, an executive session for negotiation, litigation, personnel, which is the medical, financial, credit, or employment history of any person or corporation or matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of any person or corporation from two employees.
So motion made by Mr. Lightfoot, second by Mr. Forsythe. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
This Thursday, June 30th, and we will move to the monthly reporting. So I know we have some really interested members of the public. In case you hear that, we will still be reporting, but it will be the first week of the month following the collection of data. So we'll collect for July and we'll report in the first week of August. And as mentioned, we're also, we've moved from medium down to low for community transmission level. Reminder, our July board meeting, where your best does, we're going to do a photograph of the board of legislators at the conclusion of this term to include in our proceedings. And just to let you know, as I mentioned several times, latest board meeting I can ever remember was July 11th, combined operation services on the 18th, and finance on the 25th, which you will hear the second quarter financial update, and then August meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Perkins. Second by Jim Reagan, all in favor.